Grand Rising, my beloveds. This is your girl, EQG, the Empress Goddess, the Georgia Peach, with the sweet meat. I hope all is well with my beloveds this morning. As for me, I'm well. I'm coming at y'all with From Hebrews to Negroes by Ronald Dalton Jr. This audiobook will expose the truths that have been hidden by the powers that are prevalent in America. Since the time the European and the Arab slave traders stepped foot into Africa, blacks have been told lies about their heritage. This was all by Satan's design, for he is the father of lies. Now, my loves, I have no copyright claims to this material. This is for educational purposes under the Fair Use Act of 1976. This is my disclaimer. The Fair Use Act of 1976, Section 107, allows for fair use for educational purposes and teachings, commentary, etc. Now, my babies, without further ado, from Hebrews to Negroes, we gonna get it right.
This is Audible.
I hope y'all enjoy.
Hebrews to Negroes, Wake Up, Black America. Written by Ronald Dalton Jr. Narrated by Fentress O'More. Copyright by Ronald Dalton Jr. This audiobook was recorded in arrangement with Ronald Dalton Jr. and was produced in the year 2021 by Echo Point Books and Media, LLC, which holds the copyright thereto. The views expressed in this audiobook may be offensive to some listeners and do not necessarily reflect the views of the audio publisher. We encourage listeners to engage with a critical ear and draw their own conclusions based on evidence provided in and outside of this text. Chapter 1. This ain't living. How do we get this way? Questions we need to ask ourselves, then figure out what we're going to do about it. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Romans 1:18. You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. All around the United States, there is an uncertainty in the air. The morale of a lot of hard-working Americans is low. Day after day, month after month, year after year, Americans work only to feel like life is getting harder. Most Americans are now chasing bills and counting the days that their jobs blesses them with a 2-week paycheck. Many of Americans' paychecks are accounted for even before it lands in the bank. It seems that as fast as we can get some money, the faster it is leaving our hands to our creditors and debtors. Debt, interest, and work are cracking the whip on many Americans, forcing them into a new form of slavery. Financial slavery, but also slavery over your mind and household. As most Americans are driving home from work tired, possibly stuck in traffic, with time to reflect on the day, it's easy to think about all the things that we have done or have left to do for the day or for the rest of the week. Do we have time to think about living instead of work, bills, and what our kids need? When do parents get to live their life? More and more, our lives are becoming busier, and it seems that we are spending less time living. A lot of Americans are working all day long, multiple jobs, extra shifts, overtime, and not really living. One can simply test this by driving through any neighborhood in America or driving past the nearest lake and noticing that every year there are less people outside enjoying nature. Backyard patios are empty. There are no kids in the front yard or in the streets riding their bikes. Old folks are working 30 to 40 years on the job until they get sick and die, just like a slave. Kids and grandparents are supposed to be at home. Where have they all gone? Because of the economy, and some may say the elite's agenda, most people are gone 8 to 16 hours of the day working. But if both parents are working, who is watching the kids? Children and their parents are both inside buildings where they spend over 1/3 of their day. What happened to the extended families of the old days, where the neighbors, aunts, uncles, and grandparents helped raise the children? What happened to time off or vacations? We have replaced vacation and enjoying life with working to make more money to pay for material things or debts we have accumulated. Some people even use their vacation days or days off to work other jobs instead of enjoying the day off with family and friends. Sad, isn't it? While husbands have to listen to their wives say, "Take me somewhere," they also have to calculate in their brain how much the trip is going to cost and how much working they will have to do to offset the cost of the trip. This thinking about working more hours and paying bills leads to less interaction between our spouses or children. This can equate to less talking, less intimacy, and less time spent teaching or playing with our kids. Worst case, it can lead to divorce and broken families because someone wasn't spending enough time with the other person. The problem is that we have become a society, a country, where we do too much thinking about everything that encompasses our daily lives and not enough time thinking or questioning what is happening right before our eyes. People like me and you may sense a feeling that something is coming or that something is about to happen. Maybe it's a breaking point, a point where one cannot take it anymore, and they're looking for an answer to all their problems. Unfortunately, it is not winning the lottery. It's a sense of feeling that the future is bleak and that something bad is going to eventually happen. With all that's going on in the world with unstable governments overseas, executive orders being signed by our president like it's no tomorrow, school shutdowns, threatened government shutdowns in the US at the end of the year, inflation, rising costs of healthcare, rising interest rates, rising unemployment, rising dependence on food assistance in every American city, deindustrialization of America, and the massive student loan bubble that's about to burst. It's easy for anybody to have a reason to worry. The TV shows we watch give us a fake reality, reality shows, and news that cannot be trusted. Just like in the movie Truman Show, people are finally waking up and demanding answers. Alternative news media via the internet and YouTube is spreading like wildfire. Regular media/TV news, however, is telling us that the housing market is on the rise and unemployment is shrinking. They tell us to invest in 401ks, stocks, and bonds, which we know can change in the matter of an instant with one big financial event which we have no control over. They tell us to save for retirement, but people are barely able to pay the bills every month. They tell us that the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, is affordable, but Americans are realizing that they cannot afford it once they sign up. What's up with that? If close to half of America is not working or is collecting food assistance every month, what does that say about the state of America and how much Social Security most young Americans can look forward to living on when they grow up? If today's baby boomer generation that worked 30 years on the job can barely make it today on Social Security, diminishing pensions and or 401ks, then we should be very worried right now about our future America. Many older Americans have been working for 40 plus years, from their late 20s to their 70s. Are we working our way into our caskets? What's worse, is that they don't expect us to live long enough to collect our full retirement that is owed to us. Depopulate America by way of cancer, cardiovascular, or stress-related illnesses, and raise the Social Security retirement age to 70 years of age seems to be what is in store for us. Sounds like a big Ponzi scheme or gamble, doesn't it? Well, the world is a big Ponzi scheme, and we're the ones getting duped without even knowing it. It's time we start waking up. We should be asking serious questions to ourselves and demanding answers. We should be asking why, then? What are we going to do about it? And what will happen if we do nothing? Let's just see some of the why questions Americans, especially African Americans, should be asking, because in the long run, it's going to affect us first. Why? Because we are the poorest race in America, and the poor suffer the worst when things get bad. Why do they tell us consumer spending is up? Then, why are thousands of people in every city filing for unemployment benefits or welfare assistance every month? Why is about 1/4 of America on food stamp assistance? How can America afford to grant illegal immigrants welfare assistance and financial aid once they make it to America when most of Americans aren't working or paying taxes? How can everyone expect to have a job in America if we let every nationality of people immigrate here? Somebody is not going to be able to find a job. Why would anybody want to work breaking their back every day for $7.25 an hour when they can live easier working under the table or collecting government assistance? Why do we keep establishing new trade agreements with other countries while deindustrializing America and creating massive layoffs? Why do foreigners from the Middle East get food assistance and sell this same government-bought food to us in stores for a huge profit? Why do some Middle Eastern store owners call blacks monkey and slaves, but yet they take our money every day? Why don't we boycott when we as a race are being treated unfairly, or when other races exhibit racism toward us, but still take our money? Why do party store owners get paid by the state to have lottery machines in their stores, and why do they get a percentage of every ticket purchase? If a percentage of the lottery money goes to help pay for schools, and more poor people play the lottery than rich people, then how come Black inner city schools are shutting down in these cities where most of the lottery ticket players live in? And how come no one in inner cities or urban areas ever wins the Mega Million or jackpot? Maybe it's the poor man's tax, or maybe it's set up to keep him broke. Why is the shrinking slave middle class carrying the weight of the federal deficit on their backs, while the rich hide money, dodge taxes, and get richer? Why are so many people renting? Why are more people living in tent cities, underground tunnels, in the woods, or in their cars? Why are nursing homes, group homes, transitional homes, and room and board homes the new homeless shelters for adult Americans that live on Social Security alone? Why are they spraying chemicals, chemtrails, in the sky? Why are they poisoning our food with GMO and privatizing all the water? Why do we have fluoride in our water? Why are so many jobs leaving our cities? Why are they shutting down schools in Detroit, Chicago, Philadelphia, and other urban cities while steadily building more prisons? How come Black millionaires and billionaires from these cities don't give money to build state-of-the-art schools or academies where the kids can prepare for college to be able to one day run their own businesses? Why are rich Blacks investing in the prison industry? Why are we given slave movies every year from Hollywood? Why are people wiping out their 401k retirement funds and cleaning out their savings to survive? Why are billionaires dumping stocks? Why are they getting rid of the union? Why are most Americans working 20 to 30 years of their lives only to have nothing to show for it, but still having to work well into their 60s and 70s? Why are both parents working multiple jobs? Why is everyone hoarding gold and silver? Why is everyone on psychiatric medications? And why is mental illness on the rise in African Americans? Why is the morning after pill now approved for over-the-counter purchase in 15-year-olds? And what race will it target to depopulate? Why did Blacks own more businesses and stick together during segregation than now with integration into white America? Why have immigrants quickly started to own everything while we still don't own anything? Why do certain immigrant races see to it that Blacks don't advance in America? Why is the value of the dollar dropping and the price of everything we buy slowly going up? Why are other countries dropping the dollar and using other currencies / valuables for trading? Why is there more crime in the urban areas of the United States? Why are government agencies buying millions of ammunition every month? Who are they going to use this ammunition on? Why is the government hoarding and limiting ammunition and trying to take away our right to bear arms? That's what Hitler did. Why do they want our guns? Why is peaceful protesting not effective anymore? Why are hospitals operating on a treat 'em and street 'em mentality? Why has the medical field turned into a business and the patient just a number? Why are doctors going bankrupt or struggling to pay their clinic staff and overhead expenses? Why are young people dying of heart attacks? And why does it seem that cancer is popping up in everyone nowadays? Why is it cheaper to buy Coca-Cola than bottled water in some places in America and on the continent of Africa? Why does the media show us stuff that has no relevance as it pertains to the betterment of the American people, while we are preoccupied with keeping up with the Kardashians, Real Housewives of Atlanta, or The Bachelor? Our kids' future is dying and the population of African Americans is declining. Latinos have now passed African Americans in the overall USA census, even though Black people were brought to America over 500 years ago. The world leaders are behind the scenes coming up with plans of how to control our food supply and when to implement global dominance, a global religion, and a global currency to enslave us all. Why is there so much surveillance going on nowadays with facial recognition, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, email tracking, and money tracking? Surprisingly, there are companies with a main objective to think about what we like or need and feed us advertising to keep us spending money or getting us further into debt. Even though technology has made our lives easier, it has also made our lives busier. A country that is less social, too busy to think, too busy to enjoy the simple things in life, and too busy to really see what is going on behind the scenes. We've become a country where everyone is living to work, working to survive, and not doing any living. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of surviving. I'm ready to live because this ain't what you call living. Mom and dad are now both working. The kids are working. Many Americans are unable to survive without a two-income household. Grandparents, and in some cases, great-grandparents, are now working at your local stores. People are working harder and harder for their money, but not without a price to pay in the end. There are a lot of working households that cannot even afford to take a week vacation with the kids because of the expenses of paying for plane tickets, baggage fee, car rental, hotel, parking, food, toll booth money, gas, and other incidentals and activities. What's the point of taking a vacation if you have to stress yourself out doing extra shifts before or after you get back from vacation? What good is a vacation if you have to constantly check your online banking to make sure there are no banking surprises that could jeopardize your trip? Going on vacation is not fully rewarding and beneficial if you have to worry about how hard you have to work upon returning to make up for the money that was lost. With all this working, how are we enjoying life? Even more, nowadays, who is watching, raising, or teaching our kids? In the past, children were watched by generations of family members or sometimes by their neighbors. Families knew all the other families living in the community. During segregation and the Jim Crow laws, Black communities were a tight-knit group of people helping one another. Now, as we drive up most residential streets in America, we see that everyone is either inside the house or gone working. We see no parents outside playing with their kids in the yard, because the only time we see adults outside is when they are cutting the grass or doing yard work. Most people's fancy cars are being driven to work and parked in a parking lot for 8 to 12 hours of the day. Most people may only know one or two other people living on their block, and probably after a while forget their first name. It's a shame. We find that our whole week has been taken up with busy labor work, brainwashing TV shows, eating, paying bills, and sleep. America has become a place where it is not uncommon to see people working on Saturdays and Sundays. Weekends were supposed to be a time for unwinding and also serving God, whether it is on Saturday or Sunday. How are we serving and pleasing God if we are working our lives away to pay bills or pay for material things? Matthew 6:24 says, "No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate one and love the other, or else he will hold to one and despise the other. Ye cannot serve God and mammon," money. We have become disconnected with ourselves and God. Who is our God now? Do we give praise to things we can buy, or do we give praise to TV stars becoming pregnant or coming out and admitting they are gay? We barely have time to exercise, enjoy our house or car, eat a good breakfast in the morning, have dinner with the family, or even talk to our parents, spouses, and friends. We have become less social, spending more time fidgeting with gadgets or looking at a screen. We now have interactive TV with DVR, internet, streamlined movies, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, emails, online banking, online dating, online virtual sex, online shopping, video games, online bill payment, automated computer recordings, Bluetooth, debit/credit cards, electronic billing, electronic medical records, security cameras, drones, smart TVs, and MP3/iPhone, iPad, iPod devices built into our cars along with navigation. They even have cars that can drive for you and even park themselves. We are becoming transhuman and more interactive with electronics. Advances in technology are eliminating jobs that humans once did. And more importantly, it is keeping us more preoccupied with things that are not relevant to our livelihood. Things have gotten so bad that it is not unusual to see people on the subways or buses with their headphones, looking, listening, or fiddling with electronics instead of talking to the person sitting right next to them. Also, it is not unusual now to see both husband and wife in the living room or in the bed on their separate iPads or computers, and the kids in another room on their iPads/computers too. When is enough going to be enough? Why don't we sit back and ask ourselves these questions and try to come up with solutions that will allow us to take back our lives? Year after year, we see the changes in society. We also see the rising prices of food and commodities and goods. We see the rising prices of gas, electricity, heating, cable/internet/phone, cell phone service, water services, car insurance, and health insurance. However, the amount of money we make doesn't change. Why? Because most lower class and middle class workers are employees, also known as labor workers, meaning we work for a business or company and get paid for our service. As an hourly or salaried employee, you're given money biweekly or monthly. You get nothing more unless you work more, and less if you work less. An employee's life revolves around this schedule of biweekly or monthly payments. It's almost like a peonage system in which a person is given their advance payment all at one time, and then they have to work their debt off over a number of years. Most Americans do something similar to this, but we don't get all of our money up front. Instead, we get it in installments, little by little, until we invest 30 to 40 years into a company. Then get sick and die, just like a peonage worker, sharecropper, or indentured servant. We are free to do whatever we want when we get off. We are free to chase any dreams and goals that we may have to further enhance or progress ourselves in this life. We work 30 plus years, then anxiously count down the months to collect Social Security. So knowing this, we know that it takes money in this world to make money. It takes capital money to start a business. Without it, you can find yourself stuck or trapped in a never-ending story or cycle. Problem is how to get it without sacrificing your life, your health, or without becoming enslaved. What happens when life changes or the price of basic commodities goes up, but your pay stays the same? When the economy as we know it starts to collapse, and when corporations and businesses start to cover their asses by laying off workers. This is a lot of pressure for one to think about in the future, a future that, unbeknownst to us, we have little control of, as you will see later in this book. We find ourselves trapped in the hamster wheel of life, or like a mouse running through a complex maze in hopes of getting some cheese. It may be surprising to some, but what we are going through, what America is going through, has been carefully planned years ago and precisely calculated to happen this way. By whom, you might say? Some call them the hidden masters or the elite of the world. Others believe there are very rich family bloodlines that control the world, and from these families, secret societies are born. So, who then do we trust? The dollar bill says, "In God we trust." But God is a title and can mean anything nowadays. So has man been brainwashed to trust in the elites of the world, the bankers, mega companies, the government, or does man still trust God? To better understand this question, you need to take the time to learn how all this started, even before we were born, and how it is continuing on till this day, full steam ahead, just as planned. Then we have to ask questions about these things and somehow figure out how we can do something about it or change it. Remember, the 7 deadly enemies of man are pride, envy, greed, hatred, selfishness, laziness, and injustice. If I had to add another one to fit the scheme of things as to how we ended up in this situation, it would be deceit. If you want to control a people, you simply control its money supply, its laws, its religion, energy resources, food, water, and control the information that they receive using the mass media. Deceit is always the focus of the agenda. Any information or knowledge that jeopardizes the plan of things is meant to be kept hidden from the masses, and if someone tries to expose this information, they are usually quickly dealt with. This is how the world operates today. We are brainwashed to groupthink. That is, think like a group, scared of what others will think if you single-handedly oppose or have anything to say that goes against what the group thinks or feels. The masses are the American people, and the primary target in America is African Americans. We are slowly being eliminated, and we don't even see it coming. It's time to wake up, Black America, before it's too late. Even though we have lost our heritage and past thanks to slavery, which was foretold by Bible prophecy, it is not too late to correct or slow down what is going to happen if we act now. Chapter 2, How It All Started. As a youngster, I was raised in a typical African American Christian household. Being the eldest of 7 children in a single income household wasn't easy. My parents were religious people, just as we were taught to believe in the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, and Santa Claus. We were also raised to believe in the white, brown-haired, blue-eyed Jesus Christ. We worshiped on Sunday instead of on Saturday, as the Sabbath talks about in the Bible. We were taught in Sunday school that Adam, Eve, Noah, Moses, Abraham, Isaac, the angels, Jesus, the 12 disciples, and the children of Israel were white, even though the Bible didn't say anything about them being white. As with any child that grows up in the Black church, we spent a lot of our youth years in the church. Bible study on Wednesdays, youth night on Fridays/Saturdays, occasional revivals, state meetings, concerts, conventions, Sunday morning service, afternoon and evening service was the norm. My father's family was from the South, and my mother's family was from the North. My last name was courtesy of a past German/European who most likely owned slaves on the plantations in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. I know this to be so because my grandfather was the youngest of 10 kids, but never got to see his grandfather because he was a slave in Virginia. Only his eldest brother could recall memories of my great-great-grandfather. Both my parents experienced different things growing up on different sides of the Mason-Dixon line. In the South, there were the Jim Crow laws, segregation, and so on. In the North, mainly in Harlem, New York, you had famous Black heroes such as Malcolm X, Huey Newton, Angela Davis, and Marcus Garvey preaching Black pride. We were raised to believe because of Martin Luther King Jr., we as African Americans had the same rights and opportunities that whites had as it pertained to jobs or any future hopes/dreams. After all, we were free Blacks living the so-called American dream, a family with a working father, a house, a car, and a dog. We were taught about slavery, Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, and Rosa Parks. We were taught to believe that soul food, fried chicken, chitterlings, greens, macaroni and cheese, and potato salad was Black food, even though Africans didn't eat the food in Africa. We were taught that our homeland was Africa, even though we never knew where in Africa our home was. We were taught that a man's job was to work and provide for his family. We were also shown that a woman's place was at home, taking care of the kids and being a homemaker. We were taught that homosexuality was a sin and that marriage was sacred, kept for the union of a man with a woman. That was the natural order of things that the Bible taught us. I saw that my parents treated their parents with the utmost respect and never spoke out of line against them. Everyone had their place of hierarchy in the family. Children were supposed to respect their parents and not report their parents to Child Protective Services because of a good old-fashioned spanking.
That part.
The way it should be. As we continued going to Bible class/church, we were also taught that as Blacks, we were considered Gentiles because we were not Jewish, and that Jesus came to die for the sins of the world so that we, Gentiles, may also be saved. No one ever explained why the word Gentile was first associated in the Bible, Genesis 10:5, with the European nations, but then later was changed to represent anyone that was not a European Jew. It didn't make sense. In Bible class, the teacher always tended to skip over things in the Bible, such as how white skin was always associated with a curse, as in the leprosy verses of the Bible, even though God's chosen people, the Jews, were taught to be white. We also skipped over who the Nephilim were, who Melchizedek was in the Bible, and what the Father's name is in the Old Testament/New Testament. Bible class teachers would also have nothing to say about Genesis 1:26 when it says, "And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness." The word us and our meant more than one person. I thought I was the only one that had questions about that verse. I also didn't understand why there were two verses in which God created man in his image and in our image. Why did it change from our to his? Then it talks about God creating man/woman twice in the book of Genesis, with the second story creating man out of his own image and not our image. It clearly states in Genesis 1:27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female, he created them. Afterwards, he told them to be fruitful, multiply, and replenish the earth. But wait, in Genesis 2:5, it says that despite there being plants and herb, there was no rain because there was no man to till the ground. But prior to this, readers have already read that male and female was created and told to multiply. Then in Genesis 2:7, it says, and the Lord formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Woman was then created again in Genesis 2:18, where it says, and the Lord God said, it is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him an helpmeet for him. I also couldn't understand why my Bible class teachers couldn't tell me where the Garden of Eden was, despite the Bible giving us 4 rivers that flew out of it. It says in the Bible that one of the 4 branching rivers from the river out of Eden was the river Gihon. It says in Genesis 2 that this river encompassed the whole land of Ethiopia. However, the only river that encompasses all the land of Ethiopia/Cush is the river Nile. But how can there be 3 other branching rivers when the Nile River is one of the only rivers in the world that flows from south to north? The Nile River would essentially flow to the Mediterranean Sea, northward, while the other rivers, Pison, Tigris, and Euphrates, would flow into the Persian Gulf, southward. It doesn't make sense. Either the Garden of Eden is in Africa or the Middle East, Mesopotamia. The Bible is not supposed to have contradictions. The Bible class teacher would also skip around the question of why God needs our man-made money for tithes. The teacher also tended to ignore the short passage about Enoch walking with God for 300 years, or why the Canaanites and not Ham were despised by God. Bible class never explained why the tribe of Dan is not included in the 144,000 in the book of Revelation 7, but is included in Genesis 30 and Numbers 1. I read the Bible completely and had a lot of questions that were never fully answered. Life moved on, and I never questioned most of the things I was taught by my parents, school teachers, Sunday school teachers, or pastors. Years went by, and I found myself blind to the way the world really was. The undergraduate struggle, Wayne State University. After graduating from high school, I moved out the house at the age of 17 and started living with 2 other friends on Cass Street in Detroit while attending Wayne State University as a freshman. I was in school full time in order to satisfy the requirements of receiving student loans from the government. I was also working full time as a dishwasher to help pay for my portion of the rent, utilities, food, and to put gas in my car. I then realized how hard surviving on your own really was, making only $7.25 an hour, even with no kids to take care of. I also found out that without family to depend on in emergencies, how alone one could be in this cold, heartless world. The universe didn't care if you ate prime cut steak or cube steak. This is where reality set in. It was a really cold world, a saying I say to my friends till this day. I remember feeling lost as a Black student down in Wayne State University, along with other Blacks who may have come from the same background as me or worse. Either way, the other Black students had the same look in their eyes that I could relate with. We were in school without guidance as to what we wanted to do in life, and some of us had no clue if we were ever going to finish completing all the classes needed to graduate. We didn't have a college mentor or counselor, nor did we know if one was available to us to help guide us through college on the right course. I didn't have any cousins or brothers that were college graduates. I remember as a child, 20 years ago, watching my dad go to work 5 days a week and hearing him complain about how hard his day was. He is still working and complaining till this day, just like other Americans that are still working well into their 60s. I remember no matter how much he or my mom went to the grocery store, it never seemed like enough. I remember my parents arguing about bills. I remember how my dad would remind us of our Focus Hope / food stamp days and the days where all 9 of us would pack into a 2-door Ford Festiva to drive to the east side on Harper Avenue to go to church. I remember complaining to him one day and saying that life was hard. He started laughing. I didn't understand at the time why he laughed, but living on my own for the first time in my life as a teenager, I started to realize why. Living on my own, supporting myself, going to school, studying for tests, doing homework, and trying to have a social life was really hard. I tried to take 16 to 20 credits a semester, but it was hard when I had to worry about what I was going to eat for the day, if I had enough money to put gas in my car to go to work, or if I was going to be evicted out of my apartment. These are struggles that I and my roommates faced every day. My roommates struggled more than me in school because they also pledged to a Black fraternity during our sophomore year. They ended up dropping out for a semester or two because of this and from having to work to keep their portion of the rent paid. I had constant car problems and broken windows when I parked on the street in Cass Corridor. I found myself always low on money, so most days I would not eat during school because I needed the money for gas to make it to work in the suburbs, which was 20 to 30 minutes away. Luckily, I had a car to drive because some of my friends had to catch the Detroit City bus to school every morning. By working as a dishwasher in a restaurant, I took full advantage of a free meal. Sometimes after closing, I would take food home so that I and my roommates would have food to eat. Every semester, it seemed that books would cost more. Rent and bills started to overwhelm all of us as we tried to do well in school. We found ourselves more worried about working more hours to pay the bills than worrying about failing or dropping a class. It got to a point where I found myself selling everything I had in my room down to just a mattress and a phone in order to survive. This was not what I had envisioned for my college experience. I found myself many nights walking the streets of Detroit in the Highland Park area to get food from fast food restaurants, White Castle, Burger King, Little Caesars, local marts, or getting food from friends I had known that lived in the area. Then I had to walk back to the Cass Corridor area, taking in all the sights of prostitutes, drug dealers, drug addicts, homeless people, roaches, and rats along the way. That was my yellow brick road every night, except I had no Oz to go meet. I also had to collect bottles and turn them in for cash or sell books back that I was using in school for cash. I didn't even feel bad if I had to use credit cards or cash that people had mistakenly lost at work or on campus. I did what I had to do to survive on my own. I wanted to be a man, and my pride didn't allow me to ask for help. I knew the struggle that a lot of African Americans had went through to get us to this point now in time. As time passed and my majors changed, I found myself lost, wondering what I was going to school for and how much student loan debt I had already accumulated with no end in sight. In the classrooms at Wayne State at the age of 17, I found myself feeling like a small fish in a big sea. The lecture halls were huge, and as I looked around the room, I only saw a few other African Americans in the class, most of whom were women. Most of the African American men I saw were in the Student Center food court socializing. in the pool hall shooting pool, or at the gym playing basketball. Sometimes my class consisted of a majority of students that were 10 or 20 years my senior. I could tell they already knew the direction they were going and the year they were going to be graduating. They came into class prepared with every book, course pack, study guide, or help book that was out there to help pass the class. They had audio recorders and neatly organized binders. They came in with all sorts of food, snacks, and beverages to last through however long the lecture was going to be. They also had friends that were taking the class as well that they could sit with and exchange notes or material. Seeing this made it worse, as it made me feel more like I was not prepared, as most semesters I continued to worry about how I was going to pay for certain things, such as parking, money for food, laundry money, rent, utilities, credit card bills, and books or supplies for the class. After 3 years at Wayne State and having to drop many classes to prevent getting a bad grade on my college transcript, I was placed on academic probation. I was told I could not return back to school unless I wrote a letter and met with a counselor. I hoped for the best, but also prepared for the worst by applying to Eastern Michigan University. God works in mysterious ways because after waiting months for a response from Wayne State University, I was accepted to Eastern Michigan University. Later, I found out that Wayne State re-accepted me and lifted my academic probation. However, the best thing for me at the time was to get out of my situation at Wayne State University and start fresh at a different school in a different environment that was going to allow me to focus on school only. The undergraduate struggle, Eastern Michigan University. Starting at Eastern Michigan in 1997 was a new beginning and chapter in my life. Initially, I stayed in the dorms and I didn't have to worry too much about other expenses other than putting gas in my car and laundry. It allowed me to focus on what I wanted to do and start fresh at a different school in a different environment. Chapter 3. Who are we? Where do we come from? Does skin color really matter? When talking about any subject, you cannot address and fix the problems we currently have or will have in the future if we don't know our past. Unfortunately, for Blacks/African Americans, we are the only race that does not know who we are as a people. We don't know what part of Africa we are from, our past language, heritage, culture, or even religion. Fact: 14 countries were represented by a group of ambassadors when the Berlin Conference opened in November 15, 1884. The countries represented at the time included Austria-Hungary, Belgium, Denmark, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Russia, Spain, Sweden, Norway, Turkey, and the USA. Of these 14 nations, France, Germany, Great Britain, and Portugal were the major players in the conference, controlling most of colonial Africa at the time. At this time, only the coastal areas of Africa were colonized by European powers. At the Berlin Conference, the European coastal powers scrambled to gain control over the interior of Africa. The conference lasted until February 26, 1885, a 3-month period where colonial powers established boundaries and states over the interior of the continent. They disregarded the cultural and linguistic boundaries already established by the indigenous African population. Following the conference, by 1914, the European Conference participants had fully divided Africa among themselves into 50 countries. Before this, there was no such thing as Cameroon, Nigeria, or Uganda. Major European colonial territories included Great Britain desired Egypt, Ghana, Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, South Africa, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Gambia, Sierra Leone, and Ghana, Gold Coast. France took most of Western Africa, from Mauritania to Chad and Gabon, the Republic of Congo, Also Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. Belgium and King Leopold II controlled the Democratic Republic of Congo, Belgian Congo. Portugal took Mozambique in the east and Angola in the west. Italy's holdings were Libya, Somalia, Italian Somaliland, and a portion of Ethiopia. Germany took Namibia, Ghana, Cameroon, and Tanzania. Spain claimed Equatorial Guinea. Dutch colonized Ghana. Spanish colonized Rio de Oro, West Africa. All of the other races in America can say where their relatives are from and travel back to an actual location in another country where they or their close relatives called home. African Americans do not have a certain place in Africa called home they can fly back to. We can go back to Africa, but where in Africa do we go and who will accept us? As Blacks, we cannot just book a plane ticket to the country in Africa where our descendants were taken as slaves. Why? Because we don't have any records and because we were disconnected from our heritage when our forefathers were taken as slaves. This was prophesied in Deuteronomy 32:26, Psalms 83:4, and Jeremiah 17:4. Jeremiah 17:4. And thou, even thyself, shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not. For ye have kindled a fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever. We know that we are descendants of slaves stolen from Africa, forced to serve our enemies in a land we never knew of, as Jeremiah 17:4 states. The white slave masters then gave us a Bible in the 1600s and said that the Messiah or Christ's name was Jesus. Well, the King James Bible of 1611 New Testament reads Isvus, because there was no letter J and V was used in place of U. The King James Bible, like our Constitution, was Freemason inspired. See below. Fact. King James was King of Scotland, 1567 to 1625, and first Stuart King of England, 1603 to 1625. In the west wall of the Lodge Hall used by Lodge Schoon and Perth No. 3 in Perth, Scotland, can be found a mural depicting King James VI kneeling at their altar at his initiation into Scottish Rite Freemasonry. The oldest existing record of the lodge, called the Mutual Agreement of December 24th, 1658, records that King James was entered Freemason and fellow craft of the Lodge of Scone on April 15th, 1601. The teachings of the Bible out of the King James Authorized Version led most Blacks to believe that they were Gentiles, while never revealing what our connection is to the ancient children of Israel. It also taught us that the curse of white skin back then was called leprosy, even though leprosy today doesn't make one's skin turn white. They taught the slaves to believe that they were a cursed people and that their skin color was also part of the curse based on the curse of Canaan. Slaves were taught out of the King James Bible to serve their earthly masters and worship a picture of a white man named Jesus, even if it was the name of the slave ship they were brutally put onto. Fact. The first British ship to take African slaves was the Good Ship Jesus, or Jesus of Lubeck, granted permission by Queen Elizabeth in 1562. Sir John Hawkins led the voyage to the area known as Sierra Leone and dropped the 300 to 500 African slaves off in the Dominican Republic. This began the British involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. After years of brainwashing, we bought this ridiculous lie about a white, blue-eyed savior named Jesus, hook, line, and sinker. Fact. There are more people of color in the world than are people with white skin. This is true even with the hundreds of millions of Black people who died during the slave trade and during invasions by white nations. Remember, The British invaded India, Africa, the Americas, the Caribbean, Tasmania, and Australia. If it wasn't for these British European invasions and slavery, the black natives of these lands would still be living there today. The dominant features of all mankind are black hair, brown eyes, and some shade of brown skin. Blue eyes are a recessive trait, not a dominant trait. But today, we need to ask ourselves, who dwelt in Africa, the land of Ham, in ancient biblical days? The Hamites and Semites. Did the Hebrew Israelites, if they were white people enslaved in Egypt, have sunscreen to protect their white skin from the 100+ degree temperatures of the sun? Or did they cover themselves with clothes from head to toe? It's common sense. The people of the Bible had to have been melaninated people. In other words, people of color. They would have to be able to withstand the damaging rays of the sun, even at its highest heat. Never in Egyptian relics do we see Egyptian slaves wearing full clothes from head to toe, nor do we see white people on the walls of the massive pyramids of Giza. They are often seen with their shirts off. Caucasians and races lacking melanin would be in agony and torment if they had to do slave labor for long hours, many days in a row, for years underneath the sun. In other words, the ancient Egyptians, Libyans, Ethiopians, Canaanites, and the Hebrew Israelites were black by today's standards. The Romans and Greeks did not invade Africa until near the end of BC and beginning of the AD period. The Arabs didn't invade North Africa or Mesopotamia, Middle East, until around 600 AD, 7th century. So why does race matter? Isn't it interesting that only when people try to argue that Jesus, Abraham, or the Hebrews were black, the same question about why does race or skin color matter comes up? I guess everything is all good if the Bible remains white. Surprisingly, there are some blacks that will be the ones to ask this question as if we shouldn't question that Jesus or the Israelites were anything but white. This shows how deeply rooted our views are formed from what we've been taught by America, our parents, and our grandparents. They ultimately shape and lay the foundation of what we believe. Well, today it shapes our whole world because people with darker skin tones who are the natives of the land have typically been enslaved, mistreated, or exterminated simply because of their skin color by Caucasian white races. The Americas, North America, Central America, South America, Africa, the Caribbean, East Indies, West Indies, India, Bangladesh, and even the Pacific Gulf Islands were conquered, colonized, and partitioned up by mainly European Caucasian countries. The short brown-skinned natives were left with nothing and were despised by the outside world for being so-called uncivilized by white European standards. There is no empathy for the brown or black man, especially those of Afro or Negro descent. However, because of the 12 years of harsh treatment and conditions the European Jews experienced in concentration camps during the Holocaust, the whole world has had empathy for the European Jews. So much empathy that when they killed and kicked the Arab Palestinians out of the land on the basis that they are God's chosen people, the whole world accepted it, even the Jewish-controlled United Nations. But if the Jews decided to kick all the Africans out of Uganda, which Jewish Theodore Herzl proposed in 1903 under the British Uganda program, Nigeria or Ethiopia, because they felt it was their land, would it then be a problem? Fact, neither the European Jews nor the Arabs were natives to the land as the Caucasian Arabs had only been in the Middle East since 600 AD, and the Khazar European Jews were descendants of Japheth, not Shem. The land now called Israel was originally called Canaan, inhabited by the Black Canaanites, and later Judea, inhabited by remaining Black Hebrew Israelites, not yet scattered, Edomites, Greeks, Romans, Assyrians, and others, but was later changed to Palestina or Palestine by Roman Emperor Hadrian in 135 AD. As you will also see later, the original Arabs, 2000 BC, or Ishmaelites, were black, proven by their black Egyptian mother and black Egyptian grandmother named Hagar. Islam did not exist in Africa until after the Arab invasion and conquering of Africa around the 7th AD. The only reason why many Africans are Muslim now is because of the Arab slave trade, which resulted in many Africans being born into slavery in Muslim households and palaces of the Arab sheiks, and also the Arab invasion of North Africa in around 600 AD. Before this time period, there was no Islam religion, but many pagan polytheistic religions, such as Hubal, the moon god of Mecca or Medina. So, this empathy, along with a major money deal involving the Jewish Rothschild family, United States, Britain/England, Germany, and the United Nations, would eventually lead to the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. The Jews would also get reparations from Germany in the Luxembourg Treaty, passed in 1952 for the 12 years of persecution they were put through. The Luxembourg Treaty helped Israel achieve a level of economic stability between 1953 and 1964, since most of the European Jews had lost everything during the Holocaust. The remaining rich Jews brought an estimated 100 million in assets to Israel, which in that time period was a lot of money. The treaty was divided into 4 separate agreements, one specifically pertaining to Israel. The Israel Agreement, otherwise known as the Shalumim, committed West Germany to pay Israel 3 billion pre-euro Deutschmarks, about $800 million in US money, over a 12-year period. Fact: Blacks didn't get any reparations for over 1,500 years of slavery from neither Jews, white Anglo-Saxons, nor Arabs. President Barack Obama even opposed reparations for Blacks. I have said in the past, and I'll repeat again, that the best reparations we can provide are good schools in the inner city and jobs for people who are unemployed. President Barack Obama, 2008. Fact: Unfortunately, 5 years later, after President Barack Obama made this statement, inner city Black-dominated schools in Detroit, Chicago, and Philadelphia had mass school closings with nothing done. None of the suburban schools in these cities faced closure. None of the many Black millionaires in professional sports, in Hollywood, in the music industry, or in corporate America came to the rescue for the inner city Black kids needing a good, quality education. Not even billionaire Oprah Winfrey or half a billionaire Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, or P. Diddy. Sad, isn't it? Other races wouldn't let that happen to their kids. More Blacks living in these inner cities are unemployed, underemployed, and on food assistance more than ever before. So maybe reparations would have been good for Blacks, since Obama wasn't able to prevent 49 schools from closing down in Chicago, nor has he been able to provide quality jobs or housing for Blacks living in the inner city. Without quality schools to prepare students for college, let alone a school to go to.
He's dropping that fire, ain't it?
It's very hard for Blacks in America to land a high-paying, quality job. Reparations obviously worked for the Jews after they moved to Israel and could have possibly stopped Black inner-city schools from shutting down. Since as far back as we can recall, Christians and the world have been led to believe that the white European Caucasian
Who you calling a sellout? Obama?
Jews are God's chosen people, despite what the Bible teaches us. After all, it fits all the pictures drawn by Europeans during the Renaissance period, showing that all of the biblical characters, the angels, Mary, and even Jesus were white. But what if the story about the Hebrews, Israelites, or modern-day Jews were twisted into a clever, believable lie by the Europeans and
So what those his people blood related? I don't understand what you're talking about, baby girl.
Roman Empire? From 300 AD until the mid 1400s, the Catholic Church and the Vatican was in control of all biblical information, relics, or texts that the
You
public
a
was
mess.
granted
Not
to
the
hear or
love.
see.
100. Not the
The
love.
Europeans commonly took ancient treasures, historical archaeological finds, and religious materials into their custody, never to be seen by the people they were
Oh,
taken
you say
from.
he is?
Many precious historical items,
You think he'll
jewels,
sell out?
pictures, religious objects were taken from Egypt,
Talking about the man that's talking?
Ethiopia, India, Africa, Assyria, Babylon, and Persia to be placed in British museums in European
Why you
countries.
say that?
Prior to the European, Roman, or Greek invasion of Africa/Israel, the Hebrew Israelites occupied the first and second holy temples. They also dwelt and intermarried with the children of Ham, father of all African nations, for thousands of years. The Bible doesn't.
Why you say he'll sell out?
Discriminate who can be saved based on your skin color. But the Bible clearly states that the children of Israel and their seed were to be punished forever for not keeping God's commandments.
Oh, because of that?
Deuteronomy
Because he was quoting the Bible? I might trade this book back
28:46. Deuteronomy 28:46. And they, the curses, shall be upon thee for a sign and for a wonder, and upon thy seed forever. Because of this, they would also lose their heritage to be enslaved and scattered amongst nations that they didn't know, neither the land nor the language. From what country has a majority of slaves been taken and scattered to the four corners of the earth? What race of people has been led into captivity to the many different nations of the world? Fact: during Nazi Germany, blacks and their mixed German black children were rounded up, killed, sterilized, experimented on, or simply disappeared. Blacks were called Rhineland bastards in Germany, and per Hitler, they threatened the racial purity of the Aryan race that Hitler promoted. But what were blacks doing in Germany during that time, and what happened to them during the Holocaust? They all got killed, even the biracial children. So, what racial presence is seen throughout all the countries of the world, brought there by slavery or immigration to escape persecution? The black race or white race? It's easy to figure out, as you will see later in the book. This curse.
But white people were slaves too now. You know that, right? Check this out.
This is Audible.
Cantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents White Cargo, The Forgotten History of Britain's White Slaves in America, by Don Jordan and Michael Walsh, narrated by Roger Clark. Introduction. In the shadow of the myth. Slavery they can have everywhere. It is a weed that grows in every soil. Edmund Burke. That man who is the property of another is his mere chattel, though he continue a man. Aristotle, A Treatise on Government. In the summer of 2003, archaeologists excavated a 17th century site outside Annapolis, Maryland, and discovered the skeleton of a teenage boy. Examination showed the boy to have died sometime in the 1660s. He was about 16 years old and had tuberculosis. His skull showed evidence of a fearful mouth infection, and herniated discs and other injuries to his back were synonymous with years of hard toil. The youth was neither African nor Native American. He was Northern European, probably English. His remains were found in what had been the cellar of a 17th century house, in a hole under a pile of household waste. It was as if the boy was of so little account that after he died he was thrown out with the rubbish. Forensic anthropologists believe the youth was probably an indentured servant, the deceptively mild label commonly used to describe hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children shipped from Britain to America and the Caribbean in the 150 years before the Boston Tea Party in 1773. Most of these servants paid their passage to the Americas by selling the rights to their labor for a number of years. Others were forcibly exiled and sold in the colonies as servants for up to 14 years. Many were effectively enslaved. While the Spanish slaughtered in America for gold, the English in America had to plant for their wealth. Failing to find the expected mineral riches along the eastern seaboard, they turned to farming, hoping to make gold from tobacco. They needed a compliant, subservient, preferably free labor force, and since the indigenous peoples of America were difficult to enslave, they turned to their own homeland to provide. They imported Britons deemed to be surplus people, the rootless, the unemployed, the criminal, and the dissident, and held them in the Americas in various forms of bondage for anything from 3 years to life. White Cargo tells the story of these victims of empire. They were all supposed to gain their freedom eventually.
Yep, I know.
For many, it didn't work out that way. In the early decades, half of them died in bondage. This book tracks the evolution of the system in which tens of thousands of whites were held as chattels, marketed like cattle, punished brutally, and in some cases literally worked to death. For decades, this underclass was treated just as savagely as black slaves, and indeed toiled, suffered, and rebelled alongside them. Eventually, a racial wedge was thrust between white and black, leaving blacks officially enslaved and whites apparently upgraded, but in reality just as enslaved as they were before. According to contemporaries, some whites were treated with less humanity than the blacks working alongside them. Among the first to be sent were children. Some were dispatched by impoverished parents seeking a better life for them, but others were forcibly deported. In 1618, the authorities in London began to sweep up hundreds of troublesome urchins from the slums and, ignoring protests from the children and their families, shipped them to Virginia. England's richest man was behind this mass expulsion. It was presented as an act of charity.
See, I purchased this book. I purchased this one too, White Cargo, and that From Hebrews to Slaves. And this is going to be a long series because both of these books are very long. I know that Hebrews to Slaves is like 36 hours, and White Cargo is 10 hours. So what I'm gonna do is I'll play an hour of each book every day until I get them finished up. So that'll be like 2 hours a day, an hour on each book.
The starving children were to be given a new start as apprentices in America. In fact, they were sold to planters to work in the fields, and half of them were dead within a year. Shipments of children continued from England and then from Ireland for decades. Many of these migrants were little more than toddlers. In 1661, the wife of a man who imported 4 Irish boys into Maryland as servants wondered why her husband had not brought some cradles to have rocked them in, as they were so little. A second group of forced migrants from the mother country were those, such as vagrants and petty criminals, whom England's rulers wished to be rid of. The legal ground was prepared for their relocation by a highwayman turned Lord Chief Justice who argued for England's jails to be emptied in America. Thanks to men like him, 50,000 to 70,000 convicts, or maybe more, were transported to Britain.
Sitting all they damn trash, dirt criminals over here.
Yeah, Maryland, Barbados, and England's other American possessions before 1776. All manner of others considered undesirable by the British Crown were also dispatched across the Atlantic to be sold into servitude. They ranged from beggars to prostitutes, Quakers to Cavaliers. A third group were the Irish. For centuries, Ireland had been something of a special case in English colonial history. From the Anglo-Normans onwards, the Irish were dehumanized, described as savages, so making their murder and displacement appear all the more justified. The colonization of Ireland provided experience and drive for experiments further afield, not to mention large numbers of workers coerced, transported, or persuaded. Under Oliver Cromwell's ethnic cleansing policy in Ireland, unknown numbers of Catholic men, women, and children were forcibly transported to the colonies. And it did not end with Cromwell. For at least another 100 years, forced transportation continued as a fact of life in Ireland. The other unwilling participants in the colonial labor force were the kidnapped. Astounding numbers are reported to have been snatched from the streets and countryside by gangs of kidnappers or spirits working to satisfy the colonial hunger for labor. Based at every sizable port in the British Isles, spirits conned or coerced the unwary onto ships bound for America. London's most active kidnap gang discussed their targets at a daily meeting in St. Paul's Cathedral. They were reportedly paid £2 by planters' agents for every athletic-looking young man they brought aboard. According to a contemporary who campaigned against the black slave trade, kidnappers were snatching an average of around 10,000 whites a year. Doubtless an exaggeration, but one that indicates a problem serious enough to create its own grip on the popular mind. Along with the vast numbers ejected from Britain and forced to slave in the colonies, were the still greater multitudes who went of their own free will. Those who became indentured servants in the Americas in return for free passage, and perhaps the promise of a plot of land. Between 1620 and 1775, these volunteer servants, some 300,000, accounted for 2 out of 3 migrants from the British Isles. Typically, these free willers, as they came to be called, were the poor and the hopeful, who agreed to sacrifice their personal liberty for a period of years in the eventual hope of a better life. On arrival, they found that they had the status of chattels, objects of personal property, with few effective rights. But there was no going back. They were stuck, like the tar on the keels of the ships that brought them. Some, of course, were brought by humane, even generous masters, and survived their years of bondage quite happily to emerge from servitude to build a prosperous future. But some of the most abused servants were from among the free willers. It invites uproar to describe as slaves any of these hapless whites who were abused, beaten, and sometimes killed by their masters or their masters' overseers. To do so is thought to detract from the enormity of black suffering after racial slavery developed. However, black slavery emerged out of white servitude and was based upon it. As the African-American writer Lerone Bennett Jr has observed, when someone removes the cataracts of whiteness from our eyes, and when we look with unclouded vision on the bloody shadows of the American past, we will recognize for the first time that the Afro-American, who was so often second in freedom, was also second in slavery. Of course, black slavery had hideous aspects that whites did not experience, but they suffered horrors in common, many of which were first endured by whites. In crude economic terms, indentured servants sold their labor for a set period of time. In reality, they sold themselves. They discovered that they were placed under the power of masters who had more or less total control over their destiny. The indentured servant system evolved into slavery because of the economic goals of early colonists. It was designed not so much to help would-be migrants get to America and the Caribbean, as to provide a cheap and compliant workforce for the cash crop industry. Once this was established, To keep the workforce in check, it became necessary to create legal sanctions that included violence and physical restraint. This is what led to slavery, first for whites, then for blacks.
Mhm.
It has been argued that white servants could not have been truly enslaved because there was generally a time limit to their enforced labor, whereas black slavery was for life. However, slavery is not defined by time, but by the experience of its subject. To be the chattel of another, to be required by law to give absolute obedience in everything, and to be subject to whippings, brandings, and chaining for any show of defiance, to be these things, as were many whites, was to be enslaved. Daniel Defoe, writing in the early 1700s, described indentured servants as more properly called slaves. Taking his cue, we should call a slave a slave. How many of those whites who migrated from Britain were subject to the abuses we associate with slavery? 100,000, 200,000, 300,000? It is impossible to know. No one did compile, nor could they have compiled such statistics. All we can be sure of is that the numbers were considerable. Time and again, the evidence shows this to be the case. Too many white servants ran from their masters. Too many instances of ill treatment surfaced, and there were too many damaging admissions throughout the years of British rule for white slavery to be a rarity or a localized aberration that was quickly corrected. In 1663, about the time the wretched 16-year-old buried in that Annapolis cellar breathed his last, the Virginia Assembly warned that the barbarous usage of some servants by cruel masters was giving the colony such a bad name that immigrants would stop coming voluntarily. As the cases in this book confirm, that barbarous usage was widespread and prolonged on the American mainland and in Britain's Caribbean colonies. Throughout the colonial period, those who were sold into servitude or who sold themselves as servants formed the majority of immigrants, but they have often had short shrift from historians. In the words of the social historian Gary B. Nash, most depictions of early America as a garden of opportunity airbrush
Greetings,
indentured
King.
servants out of the picture, while focusing on the minority who arrived free. A creation myth has flourished in which early American settlers are portrayed as free men and women who created a democratic and egalitarian model society more or less from scratch. The truth could not be more different. The freedoms of modern American society evolved only gradually from enforced labor and penal servitude. Many of those instrumental in planning the earliest colonies were, like the reputedly richest man in Elizabethan England, Sir Thomas Smythe, ruthless and oblivious to the misery they caused. They were nonetheless often men of vision and extraordinary resilience. The tale of the white slave trade unfolds through their exuberant lives no less than through those who were their victims. European slavery in early America is contained within 2 centuries and between 3 continents, from the tiny band of Englishmen who established Jamestown in 1607 to the slave ports of Africa, and finally to Captain Cook feeling his way along the shores of what was to become New South Wales in 1770. The 1607 expedition laid the foundations for English settlement in America, and when American independence closed the mainland colonies to the dumping of convicts and undesirables, Australia provided a new penal colony. In between, the stream of humanity flowed in a vast
Boy, them damn people were hell, wasn't it?
current across the Atlantic, but has since been diverted from its place in the histories of the British Empire and of the United States. As soon as the new nation of America was born, it became commonplace to deny the central part played in its establishment by key sections of founding fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters. Those who chose to ignore the place of both the villain and the ill-used in this new country's history included contemporary apologists, whose motivation was to create both social cohesion and status. In Virginia, the Old Dominion, where ideals of freedom flourished and where America's aristocracy was rooted, it was unacceptable for jailbirds to be discovered lurking in the family tree. Just 10 years after the Declaration of Independence, this is what Thomas Jefferson wrote about convicts. The malefactors sent to America were not sufficient in number to merit enumeration as one class out of 3 which peopled America. I do not think the whole number sent would amount to 2,000. And being principally men, eaten up with disease,
they need some. They got to try to find a new source now.
They married seldom and propagated little. I do not suppose that themselves and their descendants are at present 4,000, which is little more than 1,000th part of the whole inhabitants. In fact, at the time of the Declaration, nearly 1,000 convicts a year were being dumped in America, mostly in Maryland and Virginia. A convict dealer intimated that in the 1700s more than 30,000 convicts had been sold in Maryland alone. The numbers of convicts and their descendants in the period when Jefferson was writing were not, as he would have it, 1,000th part of the whole inhabitants, but in reality the much more significant 1 in 100. However, there continued to be those who denied that large-scale dumping of the vicious, the irredeemable, the wicked, and the plain unlucky had gone on in anything like either the numbers or over the period that we know.
You know, I trace back my ancestry all the way back to this. Well, the farthest I could go back was like 1820, but I couldn't find nothing saying anything about my people had been slaves either. If anything, I found that I had Native American, which I had always been told that all through childhood. But I found out that my great-great-great-grandmother was Native American. But they didn't say nothing about no damn slavery. They didn't say nothing about no coming from no Africa. So it is what it is.
Sidney George Fisher, writing in 1898, claimed that Virginia had avoided convicts, paupers, and inferior nationalities. The very different reality has been exposed by the pioneering work of leading American historians, such as Edmund S. Morgan, David W. Galenson, and A. Roger E. Kirch. Nevertheless, right up to the present day, many Americans have difficulty reconciling them.
And even then, when you check those census records, they tried to mark out that she was a Native American. They tried to write in their Negro. They tried to write over it. So you have to be careful with those census records because they tried to but they didn't try. They did alter a lot of records and stuff back then.
Tells to the true nature of their antecedents. The truth is that in Virginia and Maryland, a significant proportion of the early settlers was composed of convicts. The fact that wealth and nobility could grow from such material is testimony not to the importance of bloodstock, but to social evolution. This book features some of the great names of American history, who were the masters of white slaves as well as black. It tracks the ruthless kingpins of the white servant trade who bought and sold their human wares, sometimes disguising convicts as regular servants, sometimes hawking servants from
You know what? I'll tell you what I found. I found my father, because see, I was adopted. So, you know, but even still, my parents told me who my biological parents were. And even after I talked to them, after I spoke to my biological mother, she said we had Native American in us too. They said nothing about we had no ancestors in slavery. But I was able to see, I know more about my adopted parents because they adopted me when I was 2 years old. But I was able to find my fathers because my father was like, they were in their 60s and their 50s when they adopted me. And my father, I was able to find his draft card where they tried to draft him to go into World War II, but he couldn't go because he had a glass eye. Because my grandmama had to sign off on it. My grandmother was 105 when she died. I was able to find my grandmother, see, my grandfather, my father's father. Then I was able to find my great granddaddy. I found his but he came from England on a ship. I was able to find that, the manifest and all that, and I was able to find census records and all that stuff, and birth certificates and everything. But I never found anything about being no slave. As a matter of fact, all my people on both sides, my mother and my father, they had farms and stuff like that. They had their own land and all that. And he said nothing about they had been no damn slaves on the real.
To settlement. And it tells the stories of those they sold and of those who sold themselves. Some refused to be victims and fought the system by running away, by rebellion, and even by murder. Many others succumbed to disease or exploitation.
Yeah, I'm from Georgia. I live in Georgia. Born and raised right here in Georgia. Matter of fact, I live in Brunswick now. But my home is Cochran, which is up around Macon, Georgia, and Run Roberts, about an hour and a half from Atlanta. That's my home up there, middle Georgia. But I live in Brunswick now, which is about 69 miles from Savannah, south of Savannah, between Savannah and Jacksonville, Florida. That's where I live at now.
To attack from Native Americans. Some thrived and laid down roots. The book has mainly been designed along simple chronological lines. Here and there, however, the listener will discover occasional digressions or sidesteps to take a closer look at particular fields of inquiry. We have chosen to limit what would otherwise be quite a lengthy work to describing what occurred in a small but important group of geographic areas. We concentrate on Virginia and Maryland, for example, where the indentured servant system was created and where its poisonous bloom flowered most widely. The very many colonies in the Caribbean are largely ignored in favor of dealing in detail with Barbados, so providing a clear account of one important colony, unencumbered by multitudes of regional variations. We hope that this approach also helps to clarify the defining difference between the enterprise carried out on the Sugar Islands and the colonization of the American mainland. Broadly, the primary purpose of the settlements on Caribbean islands was to make money. There was little thought of empire. This role fell to the enterprises in America, where profit and empire building went hand in hand.
I'm still here,
in the great open spaces of America, indentured servants were theoretically expected to survive bondage and prosper in a growing society. On the island of Barbados, freed workers became an embarrassment. The Oxford Dictionary defines as slaves persons who are the legal property of another or others and bound to absolute obedience. In short, human chattels. By this definition, white servants were the first slaves in America, and it is upon their labor, and later that of African American slaves, that the nation was initially built. Today, tens of millions of white Americans are descended from such chattels. It is a shame that few in America claim these largely forgotten men and women of the early frontier as their own. Chapter 1. A Place for the Unwanted. Slavery's introduction to the New World took place much as serfdom left the Old, stealthily and hesitantly. Its sly arrival over a few decades hardly noticed, except by a few vigilant pamphleteers and its mainly silent victims. The seeds of the new colonial serfdom were...
I went up there to get some pictures so y'all can see it. Everybody say, did I look just like my daddy? Because, hey, these are the only parents I really knew. Like I say, they had two biological children. They adopted 5 boys, and I was the baby. I was a daddy's baby. My father was a minister, and my mother was a nurse. My father was a minister, a school teacher, a principal, and all that. And Everybody said, "You look just like your daddy." I said, "Well, that was my dad, because that's the only. These were my parents. These were who I know from a baby. You know what I'm saying?" I would love to get some pictures to show y'all. This was my grandmama. She was 105 when she died. My maiden name is Hall. I'm a Hall. My father was a Hall. Wasn't him. That's my grandmama Hall. This was my father, Reverend E.K. Hall. My father. And this is my mother, Lola Hall. See?
Planted in the 1570s, when English pride in social freedoms was strong enough for Shakespeare's favorite historian, Raphael Holinshed, to boast, "As for slaves and bondsmen, we have none. Nay, such is the privilege of our country by the especial grace of God and the bounty of our princes, that if any one come hither from other realms, so soon as they set foot on land, they become so free. All note of servile bondage is utterly removed from them." Even as Holinshed was celebrating his notion of England, forces were at work that would soon produce a very different prospect for tens of thousands of free-born English men, women, and children who sailed to America either willingly or involuntarily. Within a generation, a system of slave labor would evolve in America that would deprive them of those very freedoms in which Holinshed gloried. One of the catalysts for the white slave trade was the fear that England was in danger of being overwhelmed by the poor and the lawless, a perception of insecurity still all too recognizable today. In the course of a few generations, the population had risen by a third. In 1509, Henry VIII came to the throne to inherit a kingdom of around 3 million souls. By the time his daughter Elizabeth faced the Spanish Armada 80 years later, she ruled over a population nearer to 4 million. For landowners fattened by church lands acquired during the Reformation and common lands grabbed through the first Enclosure Acts, it was a time of gallivanting Renaissance luxury. But at the other end of the scale, life in the mid-16th century was pitted and disfigured by poverty. Recurring harvest disasters, the enclosures, and economic depressions had left hordes of peasants and laborers dispossessed and on the margins of survival. Once the monasteries would have offered some succor, but Henry had closed them down, and now the poor roamed the countryside and cluttered the towns. In 1570, 2,000 beggars were reported in Coventry alone. A crowd of 20,000 poor people gathered at the funeral of one rich magnate, begging for alms. In London, between 1560 and 1601, there was an 8-fold increase in the number of vagrants ending up in the old Bridewell Palace, which had become a house of correction. Inevitably, lawlessness increased. A statute of 1572 begins with the lament, "All the parts of this realm of England and Wales be presently with rogues, vagabonds, and sturdy beggars exceedingly pestered, by means whereof daily happeneth in the same realm horrible murders, thefts, and other great outrage, to the high displeasure of Almighty God, and to the great annoyance of the common weal." One of the most blood-stained figures of the age, Humphrey Gilbert, half-brother of Walter Raleigh, promoted the idea of finding a solution in America. Gilbert has been left in the historical shade by his brilliant sibling, but he was as much a Renaissance man as Raleigh. He was born into minor gentry in the West Country and began his career as a page to the future Queen Elizabeth, before taking to soldiering, whereupon he gained a reputation for cold-blooded ruthlessness. However, he was also a poet, classical scholar, and visionary, who inspired a generation of fellow Englishmen with thoughts of empire in America. Humphrey Gilbert made his mark during the religious wars that gripped France in the early 1560s. This was a saga of massacre, torture, and atrocity exemplified by the Huguenot captain who wore a necklace of priests' ears around his neck. Nearly a century later, Pascal wrote of this conflict. Men never do evil so completely and cheerfully as when they do it from religious conviction. While still in his early 20s, Gilbert headed a contingent of 1,000 English Protestants fighting on the Huguenot side. He exhibited dash and bravery, but cruelty too, making a practice of taking no prisoners. Those who were captured were invariably hanged. Impressed, as always, by young daredevils, in 1569 the Queen put him in command of English troops in Munster, where the English responded to a revolt by launching an ethnic cleansing campaign to replace the native Irish with plantations of English Protestants. In this gory arena, the ambitious young firebrand demonstrated an implacability unsurpassed by either Oliver Cromwell or William of Orange a century later. In every stronghold that offered resistance, Gilbert slaughtered wholesale, scouring the countryside for anyone who got away. I slew all those that did belong to, feed, accompany, or maintain any outlaws or traitors. How many lives whatsoever it cost, putting man, woman, and child to the sword. The severed heads of his victims were stuck on rows of pikes on either side of the path leading to his tent. Gilbert explained that it brought great terror to the people when they saw the heads of their fathers, brothers, children, kinfolk, and friends. Tens of thousands died. Humphrey Gilbert was knighted. It is one of the paradoxes of human nature that the most ruthless often have a well-developed sense of the romantic. And so it was with Sir Humphrey. In France, he is thought to have met seafarers who had crossed the Atlantic and to have developed a fascination with America. Marriage to a Kentish heiress called Anne Auker in 1570 enabled him to retire from the Queen's service, buy a seat in Parliament, and devote himself to what soon became his obsession. Gilbert believed the North American continent was an island and, like a number of contemporaries, burned to prove the existence of a northwest passage to China through the Arctic Circle. After studying every manuscript and classical text that he could find, he produced a scholarly-looking discourse to support his own theory, and with it, almost as an aside, the first detailed blueprint for English colonization of North America. It was said that his geography, if learned and often ingenious, was mostly preposterous. However, it was convincing enough for the Queen and her council, and in 1578 Gilbert was granted leave to go ahead. He was given 6 years to found the colony. His motives weren't, of course, purely altruistic. For Gilbert, as for so many empire builders, personal aggrandizement and the national interest happily went hand in hand. He ordered up written versions of the stories of a sailor called David Ingram, who'd been shipwrecked in Florida and spent 2 years trekking through North America. Ingram had just returned with fantastical tales of native women wearing plates of gold like armor, men decorated with pearls as big as one's thumb, and houses upheld by pillars of gold, silver, and crystal. If gold there was, Gilbert aimed to grab the lion's share. In his scheme, the envisaged territory would be a fiefdom of the crown that he would rule, taking an 80% share of any gold or silver. The humble servant would retain 20% for his queen. Gilbert's blueprint covered everything, from the size of the first colony, a mere 9 million acres, right down to street layouts and the number of churches. In retrospect, the most significant part of his plan was the suggestion of where to find the colony's manpower. He proposed transporting such needy people of our country which now trouble the Commonwealth and through want here at home are forced to commit outrageous offences whereby they are daily consumed with the gallows. It is difficult to reconcile the humanity infusing this passage with the butcher of Munster. One historian has suggested that Gilbert was mellowed by his experiences in Ireland. A more reliable explanation may be that self-interest hid behind altruism's lofty mask. There were precedents for Gilbert's scheme. Convict labor had featured from the earliest European forays into the Americas. In Spain, the difficulties of persuading free men to try their luck in the unknown had prompted King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella in 1497 to promise a pardon to convicts facing death if they would agree to go on Christopher Columbus's third expedition. Half a century later, the Marquis de la Roche, an old adversary of Gilbert's, took his pick from the Breton jails to man successive expeditions to parts of the New World that Gilbert had an eye on. It was said that de la Roche's ships were deep freighted with vice. At first, the Queen was reluctant to let Gilbert go. She was anxious to keep her former page close at hand to stamp down further eruptions in Ireland. But Gilbert was backed by his persuasive half-brother Walter Raleigh, Elizabeth's emerging favorite, and she finally agreed. The letter's patent allowed him to claim vast tracts of America in the Queen's name. Only those areas to the south already ruled by Christian princes were officially precluded, i.e., those already invaded by the Spanish and Portuguese. However, with her habitual eye on the main chance, Elizabeth secretly gave Gilbert the go-ahead to plunder the Spanish and Portuguese wherever he found them. In an equally typical move, the Queen would not fund the venture. Gilbert had to raise the money from friends and relations, and any adventurous spirits who agreed to accompany him. He recorded how he only managed to fit out his fleet of 10 ships after selling the clothes off my wife's back. In 1578, he set sail with a large fleet and 500 men, including at least one convict who had been reprieved from execution and handed over to him. His 27-year-old half-brother Walter furnished his own ship and came too. For Gilbert, it must have been a mouth-watering prospect. The royal license entitled him to total control over a land expected to be awash with gold and silver, just like the Spanish-American colonies. But a combination of bad luck, infighting, bad weather, and bad leadership turned the expedition into a disaster when it was barely out of English waters. A decimated fleet returned home without even crossing the Atlantic. Undeterred, Gilbert tried again in 1583, without Raleigh this time. He followed in the track of the fishing fleets to the Grand Banks and made landfall at the bleak fishing outpost of St. John's in Newfoundland. The Basque, Portuguese, and French fishermen already at anchor there were no doubt bewildered as Gilbert flourished his royal commission and claimed Newfoundland as English. He then issued licenses for them all to continue fishing and just as suddenly departed. His fleet headed west and south, casting along the dangerous eastern seaboard for a site to settle. It was not to be, however. Foul weather increased with fogs and mists, and Gilbert's largest ship foundered and was lost. Morale collapsed, and demands grew for a return home. Most of the great Elizabethan seafarers at one time or another were threatened by mutiny in similar situations, and most faced down the threat. Gilbert, however, could not. He reluctantly conceded an immediate return, but lest anyone think him a coward, he announced that he would brave the storms on the journey home by sailing on the smallest, most vulnerable ship, a 10-ton brig called the Squirrel. It was a typical act of Elizabethan braggadocio, and fatal. The Squirrel was overloaded with guns, tackle, and provisions. When the fleet encountered heavy seas, Gilbert was urged to transfer to the comparative safety of his flagship, the Golden Hind, but refused. He vowed that he would not desert the shipmates with whom he had faced so many perils. A storm developed, and the Squirrel began to founder. Gilbert's last recorded words, shouted to the Golden Hind, had a fatalism that made him more famous in England than anything he had previously done. "We are as near to heaven by sea as by land," he called, and resumed reading his book as waves broke over the tiny vessel. The book was said to have been Thomas More's Utopia. The manner of his death made Gilbert a national hero. 3 centuries later, the image of the visionary adventurer swept away under the waves was still being immortalized in verse by Longfellow. Alas, the land wind failed, and ice-cold grew the night, and never more, on sea or shore, should Sir Humphrey see the light. Walter Raleigh waited just long enough to be sure that Gilbert had indeed drowned, then seized his half-brother's mantle and made the American project his own. The Queen, already showering favors on Raleigh, was prevailed upon to grant him the same free hand given to Gilbert, and Raleigh set to work selling America to would-be backers. Some later romantics would portray Raleigh as one of their own, but essentially, as the historian David Beers Quinn puts it, he was an acute and hard-dealing businessman. Colonization was a business which he undertook to promote. His first step was to commission what was effectively a market report on the New World. The man he employed to undertake it was Richard Hakluyt, then at the start of a career that would make him the world's leading geographer. A clergyman by profession, Hakluyt had become fascinated as a student with the discoveries that were opening up the furthest oceans. He made himself an expert in the field by translating every work of navigation and exploration he could find, and interviewing every explorer and seafarer he could track down. Like a 16th century paparazzo, he pounded from port to greet the Drakes and Hawkinses and Gilberts returning from their latest trips of piracy in order to cast an eye over their ship's logs. Hakluyt had just published his first major work on geography when Raleigh, with his rare eye for young talent, hired him to write about America. The result was a persuasive piece of propaganda, the Discourse Concerning Western Planting. Echoing Gilbert's theme of an England being engulfed by the lawless poor and America as her salvation, Hakluyt claimed that the country was so populous that people were ready to eat up one another. In their desperation, so many had turned to crime that all the prisons of the land are daily pestered and stuffed full of them, where either they pitifully pine away or are miserably hanged. How much better, Hakluyt suggested evangelically, to put the wretches to work in a colony overseas. He reeled off a list of America's resources and set out the different industries that should flourish there. There were more than 40 of them, ranging from tar making, gold mining, and cotton picking to diving for pearls. It is a mark of Hakluyt's judgment that almost all would one day thrive in America. While Hakluyt was still writing, 2 of Raleigh's ships were probing the estuaries of what is now South Carolina for a possible settlement site. In 1584, they sent home reports ranging from the heartening to the ecstatic. "The goodliest soil under the cope of heaven, we have found here maize, whose ear yielded corn for bread 400 upon 1 ear, and the cane makes very good and perfect sugar. 'Tis the most pleasing territory of the world, the territory and soil of the Chesapeake, for pleasantness of seat, for temperature of climate, for fertility of soil, and for the commodity of the sea, is not to be excelled by any other whatsoever." The next year, a fleet of settlers was dispatched. The story of Raleigh's lost colony is well known, the fateful selection of the mosquito-ridden island of Roanoke as a site. Raleigh's celebrated naming of the colony Virginia after Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, the 3-year struggle to sustain this precarious foothold, the disastrous failure to resupply the colonists during the war with Spain, the colonists' unexplained disappearance, and the futile expeditions launched by Raleigh in later years to try to find his lost people. Queen Elizabeth's beneficence had made Raleigh wealthy. He is reported to have appeared at court encrusted with jewels from head to foot, but the American ventures drained his resources. He reputedly spent £40,000 on his voyages, equivalent to approximately £6 million in today's money. And, although he remained obsessed with Virginia, in 1590 he leased out the patent entitling him to colonize it, retaining the right to 20% of all gold or silver discovered, the same cut he had agreed to pay the Queen when his hopes were higher. He also retained the right to veto any other would-be colonists in Virginia. The new holders of the patent included...
Gangs in New York told us that with Leonardo DiCaprio. See what I'm talking about? All them, and they was Irish and all that shit up there.
3 of his friends, Richard Hakluyt, John White, the nominal governor of Raleigh's colony who had returned to Britain before the colonists vanished, and Thomas Smythe, a young man destined to play a big role in bringing white slavery to Virginia. Smythe had his own vision of the New World and would become the driving force in the Virginia project. Like Gilbert and Raleigh, Smythe had made his mark in war, both in Ireland and on the continent. And
you know what? That's what I said. Learning and building. They do. I call them the bourgeoisie, the powers that be. They've been playing all the races against each other all these years. When they they pulling everybody's strings. They got the white against the black. They got the black and against the Spanish, the Mexicans, the Latino, whatever you want to call them. They pit us all. They dividing us all up, pitting us together, pitting us against each other. I always get tongue tied. Pitting us against each other, fighting in the background, and they sitting back laughing, talking to them, and look at calling all us niggas because they the ones run every damn thing. We all one people. No matter what color you are, we all connected. We don't supposed to be here fighting each other. We supposed to be here loving each other, building up this world, not tearing it down. They treated everybody the same way. Ain't nobody better than no race is better than no other race. We all the same. We all equal. That's the way I see it. We need to cut all this damn foolishness out that's been going on all these centuries. We don't need to be fighting each other. All of us need to get together and fight them damn powers that be. The ones that's really in control, that's running all the shit. Just got us fighting amongst each other. Now it ain't enough that they don't divide it all the races. Now they want to divide the genders against each other. The women and the men against each other. What's next?
Them, he was much more than a simple soldier. He was a financial genius, and no Englishman better fits the title Merchant Prince. He could be called England's, or indeed America's, first tycoon. Smythe's father, also a Thomas, was a rich merchant who during the reign of Bloody Mary had secured one of the most lucrative franchises in the country. He became chief collector of customs duties, called the Farmer of Customs. This involved paying an agreed annual sum to the Royal Exchequer and then collecting what he could. Customer Smythe, as he became known, kept the job when Elizabeth came to the throne and made a fortune. Some of the proceeds were used to back the piratical expeditions of Drake and later of Raleigh, his son's friend. Both would have been hugely successful investments. However, young Thomas left the customer standing.
Let me shout out my family. My ride or dies. Big Dog Philly OG in the house. Learning and building in the house. Miss Jelly. Pony Locks. see this we got in here. King Kampala in the house. Y'all my ride or dies. I can always look for y'all to come here and holler at you, girl. I sure appreciate you and I love y'all. Metal Face in the house. I don't want to leave nobody out here. I got to show that love. The Taz show in the house. Much love to you all. Appreciate you all.
This was the era of the first joint stock companies, those harbingers of capitalism that opened up world trade and would eventually make Britain the dominant world commercial power. Smythe Jr. would play a leading role in almost all of them. Wherever England traded in the late Elizabethan and Jacobean eras, Smythe left his fingerprints. In a ruthless, cutthroat age, he conjured deals with rulers across the globe, from the Emperor of Japan to the Tsar of Russia. Just about every major English company that started up in a 35-year period was either initiated or run by him. The East India Company, the Muscovy Company, the Levant Company.
That damn East India Company, always the main one they bring up. That damn East Indian Company made plenty of damn money off slavery.
The Somers Island Company, the Northwest Passage Company, the Merchant Adventurers, and eventually the Virginia Company. By the time Thomas Smythe bought into the Virginia enterprise, he was well on his way to becoming the wealthiest merchant in London. With money and commercial success went power. Smythe rose through the ranks of London aldermen to become city auditor, sheriff of the City of London, and captain of the city's trained bands, London's militia, giving him command of 2,000 men. He also succeeded his father as collector of customs, reportedly increasing the take by 100%. Smythe was at the center of the debates over the lawless and the poor that raged during the 1590s. The decade had started with record harvests, but England was soon hit by the gravest agrarian crisis since the Black Death 2 centuries earlier. For 5 successive years, the skies opened and the harvest failed. The price of corn doubled, and starvation and plague spread across the nation. Following what was supposed to be a triumphal tour of the realm to mark victory over the Spanish Armada, the Queen complained that paupers are everywhere. Magistrates were ordered to take control of corn supplies, and profiteers were punished. In Colchester, in Essex, aldermen were required to donate loans of £20 and councillors £10 to buy corn to feed the poor. A baker was appointed in every ward to bake 3 seams of bread a day to give to the hungry. Parliament's response was to introduce another new law in the late 1590s to control the poor.
You know, that's what I feel like is my purpose, is to raise the consciousness of the collective, speak the truth. You know, I love knowledge. I was raised that way. You know, the more you know, the further you go. Knowledge is power. That's my key word. Knowledge is power. That's my phrase. You got to get that in your head. You know, that's why I try to drop things that I feel are going to be significant to the collective. Something that that's going to empower us all. Because we all, like Big Dog Philly say, we supposed to grow together. We learn together, see. We supposed to support each other, uplift each other. That's my philosophy.
One of the most daunting and corrupt of Elizabeth's ministers, her Lord Chief Justice, Sir John Popham, drew up the bill. Smythe served on the Grand Committee that debated it. The ferocious measure required parishes to support the impotent poor, the old, disabled, and sick, but specified severe punishment for the able-bodied, those rogues and vagabonds who, in the view of the better placed, should be able to look after themselves. Tinkers, gypsies, begging scholars, palm readers wandering musicians and actors were all defined as vagabonds. One William Shakespeare, who had possibly been a wandering actor not many years before, must have felt relieved that his aristocratic patronage would have protected him from the act. Among the punishments was transportation. The new law decreed that those who would not be reformed of their roguish kind of life shall be banished out of this realm, and shall be conveyed into such parts beyond the seas as shall be at any time hereafter for that purpose assigned by the Privy Council. But transported where? At this stage it evidently didn't matter. The imperative was simply to get rid of undesirables. Sir John Popham announced that the act would be used to drive from here thieves and traitors to be drowned in the sea. But as the Elizabethan era drew to a close, the legislation lay in abeyance, unused for several years while the country became consumed with the succession to the throne. During the plotting that developed in the Queen's last years, Smythe's contribution to history was nearly cut short. He seems to have been a thoroughly political creature, with a reassuring all things to all men persona that he deployed to recruit allies where he could. One friendship he established was with Elizabeth's greatest favourite, the flamboyant, vain Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex. In 1596, the budding merchant prince emerged from his counting house to join the Earl of Essex in an expedition that climaxed in the famous attack on Cadiz. There was no military or political purpose. It was simply a raid for plunder, and it was a financial triumph. The city was sacked and the raiders returned home.
That's what it's all about, money. That's all. That's what they all conquered. That's why they went into all these countries to conquer them, all to get their money and their wealth. That's all it's about. Greed.
Laden with booty. One report has Essex knighting Smythe for bravery on the Spanish dockside. Given their rapport, it was hardly surprising that when Essex tried to mount a coup d'etat against Elizabeth in 1601, he might have expected support from Smythe and his city militia. He was to be disappointed. On the morning of the coup, Essex arrived at Smythe's door with armed supporters, only to find the clearly agitated merchant refusing to help. Grabbing the bridle of the Earl's horse, Smythe urged his friend to give himself up, and then retreated into his mansion. Essex surrendered later that day and was swiftly executed.
Punishment was to be on the Israelites' descendants.
I got 9 minutes left on this first chapter that I was playing from Hebrews and Negroes. I'm gonna finish it up. Then I'm gonna wrap it up on this series for today.
Forever, until the regathering of all his people during the end times. People seem to forget what forever
Y'all gonna learn I'm the remix master.
and all means. Maybe this is a trick of the devil to hide the true identity of the ancient Hebrew Israelites, aka the children of Israel. In the Bible, it didn't say that the Hebrew Israelites were white, but to my surprise, mostly everyone I've run across from different countries believes this to be true. However, we do know from ancient pictures that the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Canaanites, Libyans, and Hebrews were brown/black people. We also know that if the Hebrews mixed with the children of Ham for over 1,000 years, that there cannot be any such thing as a pure Hebrew Israelite or majority white Jewish population in the world, especially if they shared the same skin color as the sons of Ham. It is a known fact that most African Americans have some Caucasian or American Indian blood if they go up high enough in their family tree. Despite having 1 or 2 Caucasians in our family tree, African Americans still tend to retain their melaninated brown skin color and tight curled hair. This is proven by looking at the physical appearance of known famous biracial people with a direct white parent, such as Bob Marley, Halle Berry, Boris Kodjoe, Terrence Howard, Lenny Kravitz, Corbin Bleu, Mario Van Peebles, Shamar Moore, rapper J. Cole, Drake, Tia and Tamara Mowry, Maxwell, Alicia Keys, and Barack Obama. The Sand People, Bushmen of South Africa, also prove that there can be lighter brown-skinned Africans born/living without white European race mixing. The science of genetics shows that blacks can produce all races.
I have seen pictures of just 100% Africans with blue eyes. I mean, black as me with blue eyes. I've seen it.
Onto the hair texture, hair color, and eye color, while it is impossible for the white race to produce the black race. White people cannot get darker. Blacks can get lighter. Dark hair, dark eyes, and dark skin are the dominant traits of all humans on the planet Earth. So, because we know that the black gene is dominant over the white gene in terms of the physical characteristics of a mixed offspring, even if the Hebrews were white, they still would look like African Americans today because they mainly intermarried with black nations according to the Bible. The whitenization of all the biblical characters in the Bible and the Hebrew Israelites by Europeans was a clever attempt to erase the true history of the black race. The Europeans made sure to show the world that nothing great came out of the black race. The biblical prophets, Jesus, the children of Israel, and even the ancient Egyptians are portrayed today in the media as a white race.
That's right, and they was all
However,
black.
Ancient stone drawings and pictures from the BC time period and early AD depicting the truth were not completely destroyed or hidden by the Romans. This was their biggest mistake. These pictures and stone drawings, often predating the Renaissance period and Roman Emperor Constantine, do not lie, despite how much weathering or European manipulation takes place to alter the picture from its original form. In the Assyrian palace in Nineveh, now in modern day, the Assyrians, under the rule of King Sennacherib, engraved pictures on the walls depicting the siege of Lachish, Israel, and captives from the tribe of Judah. Hezekiah was able to prevail over the Assyrians, protecting Jerusalem from a...
What I like about these, I love Audible. What I like about these books is they have these authors, they don't did their research done, and they have the book so well put together. That's what I like about it. And then the people that be narrating, they speak so clearly and pronounce every word so accurately. And then it just like they draw it out so you can understand it. I mean, they kind of drill it home into you the way they be pronouncing the words. I be tripping, boy.
Take over. These ancient 2,700-year-old pictures that were taken from the Assyrian palace show the Hebrew Israelites of the tribe of Judah to have tight, curled, nappy hair and beards. The siege and capture of the Judean town of Lachish in southern Israel happened around 700 BC under the Assyrian king Sennacherib. Isaiah 36, 1-2. Now it came to pass in the 14th year of King Hezekiah that Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. It says in 2 Kings that King Sennacherib took his people and replaced them in Israel instead of the children of Israel. This began the possession of Jerusalem by the Gentiles. 2 Kings 17:24. And the king of Assyria brought men from Babylon, Iraq, and from Cutha, Iraq, and from Ava, Iraq, and from Hamath, Iraq, and from Sepharvaim, Iraq, and placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the children of Israel. And they possessed Samaria and dwelt in the cities thereof. The city of Lachish was assigned to the tribe of Judah in Joshua 15:39. Lachish was one of the fortress towns protecting any invading approaches to Jerusalem. Siege of Lachish is also mentioned in 2 Kings 18, 2 Chronicles 32, Micah 1:13, and the Annuals of King Sennacherib. This relief picture was taken from Sennacherib's palace in Nineveh, Iraq, and can still be found in British museums in London, England. They were found by 28-year-old Austin Henry Layard during excavations in 1845 through 47. Layard wrote, "Here, therefore, was the actual picture of the taking of Lachish, the city as we know from the Bible, besieged by Sennacherib, when he sent his generals to demand tribute of Hezekiah, and which he had captured before their return. Evidence of the most remarkable character to confirm the interpretation of the inscriptions and to identify the king who caused them to be engraved with the Sennacherib of Scripture. This highly interesting series of bas reliefs contained, moreover, an undoubted representation of a king, a city, and a people with whose names we are acquainted, and of an event described in Holy Writ." Austin Henry Layard, Discoveries Among the Ruins of Nineveh and Babylon, 1853. 2 Chronicles 32, 9 through 16. Later, when Sennacherib, king of Assyria, and all his forces were laying siege to Lachish, he sent his officers to Jerusalem with a message for Hezekiah, king of Judah, and for all the people of Judah who were there. If you don't believe me, read it for yourself. We even see evidence of people with brown skin in pictures of the ancient Elamites, first son of Shem, and the Persians of Mesopotamia, modern-day Iran/Iraq. This can be seen by looking up images for Elamite or Persian warriors in Palace of Susa, Shushan, and also can still be seen in the palaces in Iraq and Iran till this day. The reliefs of the ancient Persians/Elamites in the Palace of Susa, Iran, portray them to be brown-skinned people of color, widely different than the Caucasian/European Iranians we see today. The Palace of Susa, Iran, was also referred to the Palace of Darius the Great, as described in the biblical book of Daniel 8:2, Nehemiah 1:1, and Esther 2:3. Pictures found in Syria and in Roman catacombs from 300 AD also show all the biblical characters: Moses, Abraham, Isaac, Samson, Noah, Jonah, etc., including Jesus, to be black. It is documented that when the Arabs from the Islamic Empire first started trading and selling slaves from Africa in 600 AD, they called them the people of the book, the people of the scriptures, or the Yehudi. This is documented in the Quran, as you will see later. After seeing all of this, I thought to myself, what is going on? Why did the ancient pictures over 2,000 years ago show all of the Hamitic nations to be black, including the Hebrews? And then all of a sudden, everything changed white during the Italian Renaissance period.
That's right.
Why did famous ancient historians Strabo, Herodotus, Flavius, and others describe the Hebrews to be of Ethiopian/Egyptian origin?
That's what.
If race.
Look, when they came, when Columbus so-called discovered America, so-called, you hear me now, so-called, we were already here. These Native Americans that they say, these so-called Native Americans of today, how bright they are, damn near white. Them not the original damn Native Americans. When they started stealing our land, that's when they became Native Americans. When they stole out, because we were all known as Ethiopians. Every copper-colored human being were called Ethiopians, even over here in the Americas.
The matter as it pertains to history and the Bible, then why would the Europeans, Roman Empire, and Catholic Church try so hard to change the appearance of the pictures to hide the truth?
When the Pope bowed down to the Black Mary, go over there and look and see who the Pope prayed to. The Virgin Mary is black.
Chapter.
Y'all, we're gonna wind it up today. We don't been on here over 2 hours now. I don't want to end it because it's very interesting. I love, unless y'all want me to go on a little bit more, like y'all just let me know. If y'all tired of listening, I wind it up if not. I'll let this other 15 minutes. I'll play this other little this next chapter is only 15 minutes. Yeah, I'm going to play that. The heck with it.
Or,
Yeah, 15
when
minutes.
did racism towards blacks start? John 15:18. If the world hate you, ye know that it hated me before it hated you. Jesus Christ. Oftentimes growing up, I wondered that if the original man and woman were white, then where did black people come from? In the black church, most African Americans are taught in Sunday school lessons that Adam and Eve are white. Western education and religion tries to teach the world that blacks are cursed with their skin color by the curse of Ham or Canaan. This is also taught in European Jewish documents and in the teachings of the Talmud book in Judaism. Some can say that it established the base for black racism even before the KKK. In the Jewish Torah Anthology, Volume 1, pages 392 through 393, the details of the true origin of the slanderous belief.
And that Bible is esoteric. You cannot take that Bible literally as it is written. It's hidden, it's symbolism, it's allegories, hidden teachings. You got to decipher that thing. See, that's why I be dropping this shit on y'all. See, I be dropping y'all that truth. I got check my playlist out. That's what I got. I'm here to what, like I say, elevate y'all. Conscious elevation.
That blacks received the punishments or curses from Canaan reads as follows. Because he, Ham, looked at his naked father, Noah, his eyes became red, always appearing bloodshot, referring to Africans. Because he, Ham, mockingly told his brothers about his father's condition, his lips were made thick and gross.
Ethiopian means burnt skin.
Like those of a Negro. Because he, Ham, turned his head to see his father, Noah, the hair of his head and beard became kinky. Because he did not cover his father, it was decreed that he always go naked and blackened by the sun.
See what I'm talking about? That's what I
The
mean.
last will and testament to Canaan was to speak not the truth, lie, hold not yourselves aloof from theft, meaning go ahead and steal. Lead a dissolute life, meaning lacking restraint or given to immoral and improper conduct. Hate your master with an exceeding great hate and love one another. The Talmud is the holy book of Judaism. It is the collection of the opinions of Jewish men called rabbis, given for the Jews to follow. All of these opinions are collectively placed in the Talmud for all Jews to follow and abide by. To many followers of Judaism, the Talmud is known to take precedence over the Old Testament, or first 5 books of the Bible, as stated below. Soncino edition, Erubin 21. My son, be more careful in the observance of the words of the scribes than in the words of the Torah, Old Testament.
Here it is. I hate this. Every time I start doing something, somebody will call, what does the name Ethiopia mean? The place name Ethiopia was derived right from the Greek word for Ethiopian, or Ethiopian, which is Aithiops. From the components, Aitho, which is Aitho, and it's got like a dash over the top of the O. I burn, and oaks, face. As a noun, it takes on the meaning of burnt face, which the Greeks used to distinguish between those in Africa and those from the Middle East who had lighter skin.
Jesus even confirmed that the religion of the Pharisees,
all this black and white mess, that shit didn't come about until after. Like I say, see, that's why I'm playing both these books together, because it all intertwined anyway. The white cargo in this book here, from Hebrews to slaves. Once them white people came out of slavery and they started putting us in slavery, that's when that white and black shit came about.
Mishnah, Gemara, Talmud was based on the doctrines of men, not God. Matthew 15:9. Jesus talking about the Pharisees. But in vain they do worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. Matthew 23:13. But woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. For ye neither go in yourselves, neither suffer ye them that are entering to go in. The Talmud also states that non-Jews, Goyim or Gentiles, are animals, like property, and thus are not human. It also teaches other disturbing things that are hard to accept as religious teachings from God. Baba Metzia, 114a through 114b. Only Jews are human. Yibamoth 98a. All Gentile children are animals. Sanhedrin 59a. Murdering Goyim is like killing a wild animal. Sanhedrin 57a. A Jew need not pay a Gentile, Cuthian, the wages owed him for work. Sanhedrin 58b. If a heathen, Gentile, hits a Jew, the Gentile must be killed. Moed Katan 17a. If a Jew is tempted to do evil, he should go to a city where he is not known and do the evil there. Sanhedrin 55b. A Jew may marry a 3-year-old girl, specifically 3 years and a day old. Sanhedrin 54b. A Jew may have sex with a child as long as the child is less than 9 years old. Ketubot 11b. When a grown-up man has intercourse with a little girl, it is nothing. Rosh Hashanah 17a. Christians, Menim, and others who reject the Talmud will go to hell and be punished there for all generations. Sanhedrin 90a. Those who read the New Testament, uncanonical books, will have no portion in the world to come. Shabbat 116a. Jews must destroy the books of the Christians, i.e., the New Testament. Moving forward, the slave trade, ran by many nations of people: Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, British, Arabs, Indians, and Jews, helped to brainwash and shape the negative views of blacks in America. Believe it or not, it also shaped the negative stereotypes that people of color experience outside of America as well. This is the reason why the slave masters, many of whom were Jewish, viewed the slaves as property or as sexual objects. In America, at one point, the Jews set up the Jewish Newport World Center of Slave Commerce. Since slavery, society has been taught that white is good and black is evil. However, Jesus condemned the teachings of the Mishnah, early Babylonian Talmud, put together by the Pharisees, Sadducees, and scribes. The teachings of the Mishnah/Talmud over the years would involve the practices of racism and prejudice to Gentiles, but also influenced the way the world would view blacks. This can be seen in Mark chapter 7, 1 through 13. Jesus warned the founders of Judaism about teaching a religion based on the doctrines of men. Mark 7, 7 through 9. Howbeit in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. For laying aside the commandment of God, ye hold the tradition of men, as the washing of pots and cup, and many other such like things ye do. And he said unto them, full well ye reject the commandment of God, that ye may keep your own tradition. Mark 7, 13. Making the word of God of none effect through your tradition, which ye have delivered, and many such like things do ye. Clearly we see that man can easily manipulate anything for his benefit. When man lies and manipulates the truth, it is done out of Satan's work, because Satan is the father of lies. The doctrines and teachings of the Pharisees towards the association of black skin to be a curse from God prove that the foundation for racism was laid over 2,000 years ago. Christianity, when brought to the African slaves by Europeans and Arabs, supported these theories. It shows how man can manipulate a religious text to support and justify their evil actions, in this case, against Black people. Whitenization by the Europeans and Roman Empire proved this to be true. The brainwashing began in Europe and spread easily to America. 500 years after white slavery, 1,000 plus years after Arab slavery, it is still evident today as people of African descent are still subjected to more social, economic, and political oppression than any other race in the world. Arabs and whites today have been known to call Black people monkeys and slaves. Blacks that practice Islam are still not equal enough with Arabs to marry into an Arab, Palestinian, Lebanese, Saudi, Iraqi, or Iranian family. Most whites and Arabs do not believe that Abraham, the children of Israel, Ishmael, or Jesus could have been Black. Nowhere in the Bible does it say anything about any of the biblical characters or prophets being white. However, that is what is shown to us in the Western world. We know that the Western world got most of its history and Bible, King James Bible, from Europeans and the Roman Empire. The Vatican and England confused our Bibles so much so that the Catholic Church Bible has 7 more books in it than our King James Bible. Most people living in Europe are Catholics. King James was the King of Scotland and the first Stuart King of England. During the Renaissance period, famous painters drew images of white angels, Adam, Eve, the 12 disciples, and even Jesus, despite the fact that in Europe, you can find numerous pictures/statues of a Black Madonna, Mary, and child, Black Jesus. After doing some research and seeing the ancient pictures found in Roman catacombs of the Black Hebrews, including Jesus, it was clear to me that the history we had been given was all a clever lie. I found out that before the Romans established the Catholic Church under Byzantine Emperor Constantine, it was common knowledge from many historians that the Hebrew Israelites were Black. From this knowledge, they believed to be of Ethiopian, Black origin, since most dark-skinned races were labeled Ethiopian by the Greeks. Fact: in ancient times, many historians called the Dravidian dark-skinned Indian Eastern Ethiopians, and those to the west of the Red Sea, Africans, Western Ethiopians. The river Ganges in India was named after an Ethiopian king that ruled in the region of India in ancient times. Many historians believe the Dravidian Indians are descendants of the ancient Elamites and ancient people of Mesopotamia. Ancient historians stated that the Hebrews were akin in appearance to the people they dwelt amongst in Africa, the ancient Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites, in other words, the children of Ham. I found out that during the Roman Empire/Catholic Church era, it was decided that it was offensive to the white Caucasian European population to bow down and worship a Black Jesus. Thus, it was best that the world worship a white Jesus. Fact: Catholic priests and even the Pope in Europe still pray to the statue of the Black Madonna, Mary, and child, Jesus. It is a known fact that there are still many Black Mary and baby child Jesus statues all over Europe. Their color depictions are not white like the Roman statues of old, but are Black like the color of onyx. If Mary and Jesus were white, why wouldn't the statues in Europe reflect this? During the Italian Renaissance period, painters like Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci changed the true appearance of Jesus and all the biblical characters by making them all white. Europeans also were responsible in making a clear distinction to the world that Israel/Judea was not a part of the continent of northeastern Africa. Egypt's border to Israel is like Maine and Alaska's border to the United States. They are still considered part of the United States, even if they are at the uppermost tip eastward, Maine, and not even connected to the USA, Alaska. Fact 1. Canaan was the youngest son of Ham, and like his brothers, he settled in Africa. Only Canaan inhabited northeastern Africa, right next to Egypt, which we call modern-day Palestine, Israel, Lebanon, and parts of Jordan. Europeans changed Canaan or Israel on the maps to be part of the Middle East because if Jesus was not born in Africa, it would be easier to believe and say that he wasn't black. Fact 2. The Suez Canal in Egypt is a man-made sea-level canal connecting the Mediterranean Sea and the Red Sea. Opened in November 1869, after 10 years of construction work, it allows ship transport between Europe and Eastern Asia without navigation around Africa. 4,000 years ago and now, anyone can still walk from Egypt into Israel, just like Jesus' family did after Herod the Great died. In those days, like today, Egypt, Africa, and Canaan/Israel, Africa, were neighbors. Hence the reason why the peoples in these lands looked the same in ancient times. This is also the reason why ancient historians believed the Hebrews were a race of Ethiopian, i.e. African origin. Back then, the majority of Africa was called Ethiopia, while the north/northeast portion was known as Put, Libya, Mizraim, Egypt, Cush, Nubia/Ethiopia, and Canaan, Israel. But in ancient days, Africa was not even a word, just as Egypt wasn't a word. Alkebulan was the ancient name of Africa. Mizraim and Kemet was the ancient name of Egypt. And Cush was the name for ancient Ethiopia/Nubia. In ancient times, Ethiopia represented most of sub-Saharan Africa, excluding Egypt and Libya. South Africa used to be called Kaffraria also. Also, the Ethiopian Sea or Ethiopian Ocean was the name given to the southern part of the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of West Africa in classical geographical works from ancient times to the 19th century. The people living in this area of the ancient Ethiopian Sea, such as the people of Cape Verde, are still mostly people of color, indistinguishable from Africans and African Americans. Likewise, in those days, the Suez Canal in Egypt didn't exist, and Israel was, in fact, a land in Northeast Africa, right next to Egypt, as seen in today's Egypt-Israeli land border. There was not a canal, river, or sea separating Egypt and Israel. There was no Middle East in biblical times, and even during so, it was not until I was older that I started asking questions of what lies I was being taught by Western civilization education. Chapter 5, The Melanin Mystery. Lamentations 5:10. Our skin, Israelites, was black like an oven because of the terrible famine. Job 30:30. My skin is black upon me, and my bones are burned with heat. Song of Solomon 1:5. I am black but comely, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, as the tents of Kedar, as the curtains of Solomon. Here we have 3 Bible verses in which the Israelites are admitting to their skin being black. There are many skeptics that will try and debunk these scriptures by saying Adam and all the biblical characters were ruddy or red. We all know that there isn't a race of human beings the color red, except for a human embryo in the womb. We also know that Adam and Eve could not have populated the world if they had white skin without melanin. Skin with no melanin or little to no melanin cannot darken. If the white race cannot darken, then they cannot produce any race of brown people. Brown/black people can get lighter. This is evident in skin disorders and with fading creams. Skeptics that use this theory need to research biology, genetics, the evolution of all the races of mankind, and its relation to melanin. Moving forward, we all know that there are deserts and extreme hot temperatures in Africa/Middle East. It is a known fact that when Black people suffer from dehydration, malnutrition, or illnesses such as cancer or renal failure, their skin tends to get darker. When Black people die, they are usually darker in appearance days later. Black skin turns darker when the body is dehydrated from the sun, and in times of famine, lack of water and food. This is proof that the Israelite skin was even more black when they faced famine. Lamentations 5:10. or when they were exposed to the extreme heat from the UV rays of the sun. Job 30:30. This doesn't happen for white races, such as European Caucasians and even Caucasian Arabs. If it did, then we should expect to see the European Caucasians in Israel, Middle East, the European Caucasians in India, and the Caucasian Arabs in Africa/Middle East get darker in the sun, just like light-skinned African Americans. But this doesn't happen, as we can see by watching TV. White races become paler when going through the effects of severe malnutrition on the body. When white skin is exposed to the effects of the sun's UV rays, their skin gets red and irritated. With long-term exposure, the end result is often skin cancer or a leathery, wrinkled, dried skin appearance. Melanin in people of color protects the skin from the one thing that all living creatures need to thrive: the sun. Fact. It is a known fact that civilization cannot thrive in extreme cold temperatures without sunlight. This is why, for most people, it is agreed that the Garden of Eden originated along the Nile River in Africa. Let's break down this thing called melanin. Black people produce melanin even when we are not in the sun. There are two types of melanin melanocytes produce: eumelanin and pheomelanin. The particular type of melanin that a person of color produces is eumelanin, which is more effective in protecting the skin from UV rays than the melanin that white skin produces. Eumelanin is responsible for brown or black hair and dark skin that tans easily. Light-skinned African Americans can quickly tan in just a couple of hours on the beach in Miami, while white Arabs can live over in the Middle East for months and still appear to not have a tan. This is because of our genetic inheritance of melanin, which comes from our ancestors who were taken as slaves from Africa. White races that produce mostly pheomelanin tend to have red or blonde hair, freckles, and light-colored skin that tans poorly. Because pheomelanin does not protect the skin from UV radiation, people with more pheomelanin have increased risk of skin damage, sunburn, actinic keratosis, and skin cancer caused by constant sun exposure. Furthermore, Caucasians only produce melanin when in the sun, after the UV rays have penetrated the epidermis and caused damage to the skin. Melanin also functions as a free radical scavenger because it affects the lipids that maintain moisture in the outer layer of our skin. Moist skin fares better over time than dry skin, and for this reason, black skin ages less/wrinkles less than white skin. The original man had to be able to withstand the sun. It is well known that the original man didn't come from Antarctica, but instead originated in Africa, just as it is pretty well known that melanin is responsible for skin color, eye color, and hair color. The dominant features of mankind throughout the world are brown/black hair, brown eyes, and brown skin. There are more people in the world with brown skin, black hair, and brown eyes than people with white skin, blonde hair, or blue eyes. This proves that all mankind came from a man and woman that were able to pass down the ability to produce melanin even at its highest concentration. Without the ability to produce melanin or tan, the whole world would be white. It is medically proven that when people lack the ability to produce melanin, albino, the result is white skin, blonde hair, and red, green, blue eyes. In eyes. It is also a fact that albinos also have medical problems like sensitive skin and visual complaints, photosensitivity. Many Dravidian East Indian albinos, Native American Indian albinos look identical to white people. The Nuristani people of Pakistan/Afghanistan look like Caucasians, blonde hair, and have more blue/green-eyed offspring than Europeans. Some say they are Afghanistan/Pakistan/Indian albinos that have evolved over the years. Others say they are immigrants from other European nations. These Nuristani people are nevertheless still pale in skin color despite living in an area with adequate sun and heat to produce vitamin D or a tan in a melaninated individual. This phenomenon is also seen in Iraqis and Iranians who are identical in appearance to Europeans yet live in hot climates in the desert. White people living in South Africa, called Afrikaners, are still white even after having generations, 500 plus years, of children in the hot temperatures of Africa. This proves that skin color is not an adaptation to sunlight or heat. Also, people of color can have variations in hair texture and color, as seen by the dark-skinned Melanesians of the Solomon Islands with blonde hair, the dark-skinned Australian Aborigines, and the dark-skinned Dravidian Indian. Africans with ocular albinism, Nettleship Falls albinism, or juvenile uveitis can have blue eyes without Caucasian mixing. There is no disease or genetic disorder that causes white skin to turn black. For this reason, it is only logical to say that the original man could not have been a white man. The most important thing that people should get out of these examples is that people of color can get lighter in regards to their skin color, hair color, and eye color, because it is a reflection on melanin production. Less melanin production in the hair, skin, and eyes equates to lighter colors than brown. These are usually caused by recessive traits or genetic mutations that prohibit the production of melanin. Again, there is no disease or genetic disorder that makes the white race turn dark as Black people, Dravidian Indians, or the Aboriginal people of Australia, or the people living on the Andaman Islands. There is no reverse albino disorder. So let's explain where melanin comes from and why it is not a genetic mutation. The third eye and melanin. Most people do not know that it is the pineal gland, which is also referred to as the third eye or all-seeing eye, that produces melatonin, which in turn stimulates the pituitary gland to produce MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormone, which in turn produces melanocytes, which produce melanin. Fact. The pineal gland is shaped like a pine cone and is considered the all-seeing eye in Hinduism and Buddhism. People that had their pineal gland fully activated were believed to be kings and gods. The pine cone symbol can be found in the ancient ruins of the Indonesians, Babylonians, Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, and the Christians. It is seen in the staff of Osiris, the Catholic Church, Vatican, and in ancient Babylonian relics. Mystical, esoteric, and Gnostic teachings state that the pineal gland is the connecting link between the physical and spiritual world. The pineal gland has a lens, retina, and cornea, just like our physical eyes. The pineal gland is also responsible for your DNA system, maintaining the body's circadian, sleep-wake cycle, dreams, emotions, behavior, intuition, memory, learning, body temperature, and regulating the onset of puberty in females. To many, it is referred to as being the seat of the soul or the seat of consciousness. It is capable of making a compound called DMT, dimethyltryptamine. DMT is released from the pineal gland during extraordinary states such as time of death and time of birth. This gland is stated to be the mechanism from which we enter and leave our physical bodies. Facts about the pineal gland include: pineal gland produces serotonin, which is considered the happy hormone. Pineal gland produces melatonin, which is considered the hormone of darkness. During meditation, the pineal and pituitary glands have been shown to vibrate in unison. Pineal gland got its name because it resembles a pine cone. Vatican City has a large statue in the shape of a pine cone in the courtyard of the pine cone. Pineal gland has the second highest blood flow in the body next to the kidneys. Pineal gland accumulates the most fluoride in the body, and this is one reason for its calcification. Much research has been done to prove that fluoride in our drinking water is used by the elites to dumb Americans down by calcifying our pineal glands. Pineal gland is light sensitive, so it is stimulated by light. Pineal gland is outside the blood-brain barrier, which makes it technically not within the brain. ELF, extremely low frequency, adversely affects the pineal gland. Unplugging all electronic devices, ELF devices, while you are asleep will help increase dream recall, lucidity, and astral projection. The ancient Sumerians gave the pineal gland the description of a pine cone. You can see it in all the symbolism encoded in ancient art in different cultures. Some examples are the movie Stargate, the Eye of Ra, Staff of Osiris, Lord of the Underworld, King Tut sculptures, the Kundalini serpents, Babylonian gods, Hinduism, pineal gland, and the third eye, etc. Buddhism hair is the symbol of the pineal gland. Even the Vatican has a lot of pine cone symbolism. Vatican Square has a gigantic statue of a pine cone. Knowledge of sacred geometry
Hold on, I gotta
focuses
rewind
on
that.
the pineal gland. Fair and dark as Black people, Dravidian Indians, or the Aboriginal people of Australia, or the people living on the Andaman Islands. There is no reverse albino disorder. So let's explain where melanin comes from and why it is not a genetic mutation. The third eye and melanin. Most people do not know that it is the pineal gland, which is also referred to as the third eye or all-seeing eye, that produces melatonin, which in turn stimulates the pituitary gland to produce MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormone, which in turn produces melanocytes, which produce melanin. Fact: the pineal gland is shaped like a pine cone and is considered the all-seeing eye in Hinduism and Buddhism. People that had their pineal gland fully activated were believed to be kings and gods. The pine cone symbol can be found in the ancient ruins of the Indonesians, Babylonians, Egyptians, Greeks, Romans, and the Christians. It is seen in the staff of Osiris, the Catholic Church, Vatican, and in ancient Babylonian relics. Mystical, esoteric, and Gnostic teachings state that the pineal gland is the connecting link between the physical and spiritual world. The pineal gland has a lens, retina, and cornea, just like our physical eyes. The pineal gland is also responsible for your DNA system, maintaining the body's circadian, sleep-wake cycle, dreams, emotions, behavior, intuition, memory, learning, body temperature, and regulating the onset of puberty in females. To many, it is referred to as being the seat of the soul or the seat of consciousness. It is capable of making a compound called DMT, dimethyltryptamine. DMT is released from the pineal gland during extraordinary states such as time of death and time of birth. This gland is stated to be the mechanism from which we enter and leave our physical bodies. Facts about the pineal gland include: pineal gland produces serotonin, which is considered the happy hormone. Pineal gland produces melatonin, which is considered the hormone of darkness. During meditation, the pineal and pituitary glands have been shown to vibrate in unison. Pineal gland got its name because it resembles a pine cone. Vatican City has a large statue in the shape of a pine cone in the courtyard of the pine cone. Pineal gland has the second highest blood flow in the body next to the kidneys. Pineal gland accumulates the most fluoride in the body, and this is one reason for its calcification. Much research has been done to prove that fluoride in our drinking water is used by the elites to dumb Americans down by calcifying our pineal glands.
Wow.
Pineal gland is light sensitive, so it is stimulated by light. Pineal gland is outside the blood-brain barrier, which makes it technically not within the brain. ELF, extremely low frequency, adversely affects the pineal gland. Unplugging all electronic devices, ELF devices, while you are asleep will help increase dream recall, lucidity, and astral projection. The ancient Sumerians gave the pineal gland the description of a pine cone. You can see it in all the symbolism encoded in ancient art and different cultures. Some examples are the movie Stargate, the Eye of Ra,
That's right.
Staff of Osiris, Lord of the Underworld, King Tut sculptures, the Kundalini serpents, Babylonian gods, Hinduism, pineal gland, and the third eye, etc.
See, I'm going to leave it here because I'm almost at 3 hours now. See what I'm talking about? We're going to learn. Nobody knows everything. No one on this earth knows everything. We're going to learn, continue to learn till the day we leave this planet. This I did. I didn't know that about, because sometimes I have a problem remembering my dreams because I sleep with the TV on. So now I know I need to turn that TV off and stuff. But he say unplug everything. See what I'm talking about? You learn something every day, my loves. Anyway, my babies, this is your girl, Empress Queen Goddess, the Georgia Peach. As always, if y'all enjoy my content, please like, share, subscribe. Drop me a comment in the box below. And as I always tell you, my babies, as above, so below. As within, so without. Go within, so you never go without. Ashe.